Picture this: a dusty sun-scorched horizon, the rhythmic thunder of iron-clad sandals, and the gleaming standards of Rome's invincible legions marching toward destiny. For centuries, these armies conquered the known world, led by brilliant generals whose names echo through time: Caesar, Scipio, Pompey. But what about those commanders who never made it into the history books? The ones who led vital campaigns, won impossible battles, and then vanished, their triumphs erased, their identities swallowed by the sands of time, their very existence questioned. Why were these military masterminds forgotten, and where did they go? Today, we're setting out on a quest not through dusty libraries, but across forgotten landscapes and buried ruins, to uncover one of history's most tantalizing mysteries: the final resting places of Rome's lost generals. We're talking about not one or two, but 30 hidden tombs concealed for centuries, waiting to reveal secrets that could reshape our understanding of the Roman world. This isn't just a story about archaeology. It's a detective story spanning millennia, filled with coded clues, overlooked inscriptions, and whispers of empire-shaking conspiracies. It's about honor, betrayal, and the fragile line between remembrance and oblivion. You're about to join a journey that crosses continents and decodes ancient lies. We'll walk in the footsteps of legions lost to time, and explore how and why Rome's greatest leaders could simply disappear from record, only to be rediscovered in silent, secret crypts, their stories still etched in stone and waiting for someone to listen. So settle in. What you're about to witness goes beyond dry history. This is a search for glory denied and truth resurrected. Our journey begins not in the sun-drenched Italian peninsula, but in the cold, misty forests of Germania. The year is 9 AD, and the Roman Empire is about to suffer a blow so catastrophic it will echo for centuries. 3 entire legions, the 17th, 18th, and 19th, are ambushed and annihilated in the Teutoburg forest by a coalition of Germanic tribes led by the cunning Arminius. The commanding general, Publius Quinctilius Varus, is known to have taken his own life in the face of certain capture and a gruesome death. But history, in its focus on Varus and the lost eagle standards, has largely forgotten the men who stood with him. The senior officers, the legates and tribunes, Rome's military elite, vanished alongside their soldiers. Their fates became one of history's quietest mysteries. For a long time, the story ended there: a monumental defeat, a grieving Emperor Augustus, and a border forever fixed at the Rhine. But archaeology never rests. The suspected battlefield at Chalcis in modern-day Germany has been a treasure trove of grim discoveries for decades. We've found the scattered bones of legionaries, bent and broken spearheads, and even a rare mask from a cavalry helmet. Each find paints a picture of chaos and brutal, close-quarters combat. Yet, recent digs have unearthed something even more compelling: small, discrete clusters of artifacts that don't fit the pattern of the common soldier. We're talking about intricate pieces of ornate armor, the finely crafted grip of a sword that only a high-ranking officer could afford, and most tellingly, fragments of a ceremonial belt known as a cingulum militare. These belts, broad and decorated with elaborate metal plates, were not just functional. They were powerful symbols of rank and authority, worn exclusively by military officers. Finding these valuable items left on the field is strange in itself. Looters would have snatched them up immediately, but the context of their discovery is what truly sparks the imagination. They weren't scattered randomly among the chaos of the main battle line. Instead, they've been found in more isolated, almost hidden spots away from the central killing zone, sometimes accompanied by a few other high-value items as if placed with purpose. This has led some historians and archaeologists to a startling theory. Could these secluded spots be the hidden, hurried graves of Varus's senior staff? In the aftermath of the slaughter, the victorious Germanic tribes, led by Arminius, had a complex relationship with the Roman military hierarchy. While they showed no mercy to the common soldier, they may have held a certain respect for the high-ranking officers, or perhaps saw a strategic value in denying Rome their bodies. A public display of a general's corpse is a powerful message. A hidden grave is a different kind of statement altogether, and this is where we touch on the political reasons for such a concealment. For Rome, the loss of 3 legions was a military disaster, but the loss of its entire command structure, its best and brightest young aristocrats sent to the frontier to prove their worth, was an unimaginable humiliation. Emperor Augustus, according to the historian Suetonius, was so distraught he would wander his palace, beating his head against the walls and crying, "Quintili ver legions red." Varus, give me back my legions. The very idea that the bodies of these noblemen lay abandoned, defiled, or lost in a foreign land was a stain on the empire's honor. If there was even a whisper that a loyal centurion or a small group of survivors managed to bury their commanders in unmarked graves to save them from desecration, Rome would have had every reason to keep it quiet. Acknowledging those secret burials would mean acknowledging they had no way to recover them, that their power stopped at the edge of that dark forest. The tombs, if they exist, are not just graves. They are monuments to a shame so profound that erasing them from history was the only acceptable option for a wounded empire. Yet if the shame of Teutoburg forced Rome to hide its dead, the story of our second tomb reveals the opposite impulse, a powerful desire to honor a man that the empire itself declared an enemy. We now travel from the gloomy German woods to the arid, sun-baked highlands of Hispania decades later, to uncover the final resting place of perhaps the Republic's most brilliant and tragic rebel, Quintus Sertorius. Sertorius was a paradox, a loyal Roman general who became Rome's most formidable foe. After being on the losing side of a civil war, he was forced into exile in Hispania. But instead of fading into obscurity, he did the unthinkable. He raised an army not just of his fellow Roman exiles, but of the local Iberian tribes, and he forged a rival Roman state in the west that held off the might of the Senate for nearly a decade. He was a master of guerrilla warfare, a charismatic leader who was said to be guided by a mystical white fawn, a gift from the goddess Diana that whispered secrets to him. To his followers, he was a liberator. To the government in Rome, he was the ultimate traitor. His end was as dramatic as his life. In 72 BC, after years of successful resistance, he was assassinated not by an enemy, but by his own officers, led by the perfidious Perpenna. These were men who had grown jealous of his power and believed they could cut a deal with Rome by delivering his head. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. The Roman general Pompey, who had been struggling to defeat Sertorius for years, was both relieved and utterly disgusted. He immediately executed Perpenna and his co-conspirators for their dishonorable act. But this leaves us with a compelling historical question. If Pompey had Sertorius's assassins killed, what did he do with Sertorius's body? The Roman tradition was clear. Even an enemy's remains, especially those of a former citizen of such high stature, were often treated with a degree of respect and returned to his family for burial. Yet there is no record of this happening. Sertorius, the man who defied Rome, simply vanishes from the historical record at the moment of his death. This is where local legend and modern archaeology begin to weave a fascinating alternative narrative. The key lies with the people Sertorius had spent a decade fighting for and alongside, the Celtiberian tribes. These native peoples had seen Sertorius not as a foreign occupier, but as a true partner. He governed fairly, respected their customs, and gave them a stake in his fledgling state. His sudden murder at the hands of treacherous Romans would have been seen as a profound betrayal and a devastating loss. The idea that they would allow his body to be taken by Pompey, the man leading the army sent to crush their independence, is almost unthinkable. The ancient sources point us toward the city of Clunia, a stronghold of the Arevasi tribe and a key center of Sertorius's power. It is here, in the rugged landscape surrounding this ancient settlement, that a compelling theory has taken root. Local folklore for centuries has spoken of a great chieftain, a Romanized barbarian or a barbarian Roman, buried in a secret tomb with his treasures hidden away from the conquering legions. For a long time, this was just a story, but recent excavations near Clunia have uncovered something extraordinary. Archaeologists have found a small, unmarked rock-cut tomb set apart from any known necropolis. It contained no grand inscriptions, no wealth of gold to attract looters. Instead, it held the remains of a single individual, a man of advanced age, buried with a few simple grave goods. But among these items were two that make this discovery pulse with possibility: a simple but well-worn Roman military ring, and the fragmented pieces of a ceremonial dagger of a style used exclusively by high-ranking officers in the late Republic. This was not the tomb of a local chieftain. This was the grave of a Roman commander. The hidden, almost anonymous nature of the burial speaks volumes. It suggests a funeral conducted in haste and in secret by people who revered the man but feared the consequences of honoring him publicly. They gave him a final resting place that was safe, respectful, but utterly devoid of the glory he was due, knowing that any monument would be desecrated by the victorious Romans seeking to erase his memory. They chose obscurity over oblivion, hiding their hero in plain sight to protect his legacy from the very empire that created him. This secret sepulchre is a testament not to Rome's power, but to the power of the people who loved Quintus Sertorius enough to defy Rome and guard his silence for 2,000 years. But the deliberate erasure of a hero like Sertorius by those who feared his legacy stands in stark contrast to what happens when an entire branch of a legendary family line seems to vanish from history itself. Our journey now takes us across the Mediterranean to the sun-blasted plains of North Africa, to the very heart of Rome's greatest rival, Carthage. It is here we search for the third tomb, that of a man whose very name was once synonymous with victory, a Scipio who conquered a kingdom, yet somehow became a ghost in his own famous family, Lucius Cornelius Scipio. Everyone knows the name Scipio Africanus, the brilliant general who finally defeated Hannibal at Zama and saved Rome. But history often forgets that greatness ran in the family. Decades after Zama, another Scipio arrived in Africa, not to destroy Carthage but to tame the wild kingdom of Numidia to its west. Lucius Cornelius Scipio, likely a nephew of the great Africanus, was sent on a critical mission. The Numidian king, Jugurtha, was a cunning and ruthless foe, and his guerrilla tactics were bleeding the Roman legions dry in a brutal war that seemed to have no end. Lucius Scipio was tasked with what many thought was impossible: bring Jugurtha to heel, and against all odds he succeeded. Through a combination of brilliant military strategy and shrewd diplomacy, he broke the Numidian resistance and secured a vital victory for Rome, earning himself the coveted honorific Asiagenus for an earlier campaign, though his African triumph should have been his defining legacy. So why is he almost entirely absent from the historical spotlight, overshadowed by his uncle? The answer may lie not in his life but in his death and burial. For centuries, the final resting place of this triumphant Scipio was a complete mystery. The grand family tomb in Rome, the Sepulchrum Scipionum, held no inscription for him. It was as if he had been written out of the family history. The prevailing theory was that he died and was buried in the east, far from Rome. That is, until a team of archaeologists surveying the outskirts of ancient Carthage made a breathtaking discovery. Nestled in a secluded valley, away from the main Roman ruins, they found the remains of a once magnificent mausoleum. Time and looters had stripped it of its obvious treasures, but they could not erase the story told in stone. The architecture was unmistakably Roman, but the decorative flourishes told a more complex, fascinating tale. Instead of the classic Roman iconography of gods and laurel wreaths, The fragmented reliefs depicted scenes of cavalry charges against warriors on horseback, of elephants, the fearsome war beasts of North Africa, being brought to their knees by disciplined Roman formations. This was not generic triumphal art, this was a specific visual record of the Numidian campaign. Most telling of all was the discovery of a heavily damaged inscription plaque. Pieced together with painstaking effort, it didn't bear the name Scipio Africanus. It instead revealed a fragment of a different, almost forgotten name, Lucius Cornelius Scipio Aeneas. This hidden mausoleum, built not in the heart of Rome but on the very frontier he conquered, changes everything we thought we knew. Why here? Why not in the family tomb? The answer may be one of politics and profound personal choice. By building his final monument here in Africa, Lucius Scipio was making a powerful statement. He was proclaiming for all eternity that his legacy was not tied to the shadow of his famous uncle in Rome, but was rooted in his own independent conquest in the very land he had brought under Roman control. He was the Scipio who tamed Numidia, and he wanted to rest forever as its master. This was a declaration of individual glory, a permanent monument to a personal achievement that he feared might be forgotten if he was simply laid to rest alongside his more famous relatives back home. His hidden tomb is not a story of erasure, but of a defiant, proud claim to a legacy that he insisted would not be forgotten, even if it meant building his own eternity an ocean away from his homeland. Yet the defiant pride of a Scipio choosing his own legacy is one side of the Roman coin, the other is the quiet, desperate loyalty of soldiers determined to protect their fallen commander from the ultimate disgrace. To see this, we must now journey to the very edge of the empire, to the misty, rain-swept hills of Britannia. Here, in a land the Romans never fully tamed, we find the story of a general who conquered it, only to be buried by it in a secret that his men vowed to keep. Our fourth tomb belongs to Publius Ostorius Scapula, the first Roman governor of Britain to truly bring the relentless warfare to the fierce tribes of Wales. Appointed in 47 AD, Ostorius was a whirlwind of military energy. He disarmed suspicious tribes in the lowlands, launched brutal campaigns against the Decingli in the north, and famously defeated the powerful Caratacus, king of the Catuvellauni, capturing him and sending him in chains to Rome. For a moment, it seemed the island would finally be pacified, but the cost of this constant campaigning broke Ostorius Scapula himself. The Roman historian Tacitus tells us he simply wore himself out, and he died of exhaustion and illness in the field, still on active duty in the year 52. His death could not have come at a worse time. The tribe he had spent years trying to crush, the Cilias of southern Wales, were immediately reinvigorated. They swore a fierce oath to avenge their previous defeats, and Tacitus records their chilling promise. They would wipe out the Roman army and desecrate the general's body itself. This threat of posthumous mutilation was the ultimate horror for a Roman aristocrat. The belief was that a violated, unburied body could not cross into the afterlife. Its soul would be doomed to wander the earth in torment for eternity. For Ostorius's loyal legionaries, the choice was clear. They could not risk a slow, ceremonial procession to send his body back to Rome. The Cilias would have ambushed them in a heartbeat. But they also could not and would not allow their beloved commander to suffer such a fate. They had to hide him, but where? The answer may lie in the shadows of one of Rome's most important early British fortresses, the site known today as Wroxeter, or to the Romans Viraconium Cornovirum. Wroxeter started as a legionary fortress for the 14th Legion, a key strategic base for campaigns into Wales. It was a place Ostorius Scapula knew intimately, a bastion of Roman order on the frontier. For decades, archaeologists working at Wroxeter have been puzzled by a large, solitary earthen mound located just outside the original fortress walls. Locals have long called it simply the General's Mound, a name passed down through generations without a clear origin story. Excavations have been limited due to its protected status, but ground-penetrating radar and core sampling have revealed something astonishing beneath the turf. The mound is not a natural hill. It is a carefully constructed barrow, and at its heart is a central chamber of mortared stone, a construction technique the native Britons did not use at the time. This was a Roman tomb, and a significant one, but the most compelling evidence wasn't found in the mound itself, but in a drainage ditch nearby. During a dig in the 1990s, archaeologists discovered a small, broken piece of a marble inscription. It was just a fragment, but it held a few crucial, tantalizing letters, part of a name, SCAP, and a title, Leg Evgprpr, which stands for Legatus Augusti Pro Praetor, the official title of a provincial governor. The fragment is too small to be definitive, but the timing, the location, and the title are a perfect match for only one man, Ostorius Scapula. The theory is that his men, under cover of darkness, constructed this unmarked, anonymous barrow within sight of the safety of their fortress walls. They gave him a full Roman burial, but they left no grand inscription, no towering monument that would draw the attention of the vengeful Siliers. They buried their general in the land he died to conquer, hiding his glory to protect his peace, turning his tomb into a secret held by an entire legion. For centuries, the only marker was a grass-covered hill, a silent testament to the loyalty that outlasts even empire. But the loyalty of soldiers protecting their commander's honor in Britannia reveals a profound truth about Roman military culture, a bond that could transcend even death. Yet this same empire could also harbor a venomous hatred so intense it pursued a man beyond the grave. To witness this darker impulse, we must now travel from the foggy frontier of the West to the ancient, sun-drenched lands of the Eastern Mediterranean, following the trail of one of history's most infamous figures, Gaius Cassius Longinus, the lead architect of Julius Caesar's assassination. After the deed was done on the Ides of March, Cassius and his co-conspirator, Marcus Brutus, knew they could not remain in Rome. They fled to the east, to the wealthy and powerful provinces where they could raise armies and funds, positioning themselves as the last defenders of the Republic against the rising tide of Caesar's heir, Octavian, and his ruthless ally, Mark Antony. For a time, Cassius was spectacularly successful. He commandeered legions, extracted vast sums of money from cities like Tarsus, and styled himself as a legitimate Roman general governing Syria. He even scored a military victory against the Parthians, proving his strategic mettle. But his newfound power was built on a foundation of sand. The shadow of the assassination followed him everywhere. The final showdown came in 42 BC at the twin battles of Philippi in Greece. Despite a strong position and a capable force, the fortunes of war turned against the liberators. In the first engagement, Cassius's camp was overrun. Mistakenly believing his friend Brutus had also been defeated and unwilling to be captured, the stern and principled Stoic chose to take his own life, ordering a freedman to run him through with his own sword. His death effectively sealed the fate of the Republican cause. For the victorious Octavian, however, the death of his father's murderer was not nearly enough. He and Antony pursued a policy of damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory against the conspirators. Their properties were confiscated, their names were chiseled off public monuments, and their families were forbidden from publicly mourning them. The body of Cassius, the mastermind of the plot, was a particular object of this vengeful fury. The historical accounts are clear that Octavian refused to grant the customary clemency of allowing the family to retrieve and bury the body. His remains were to be left on the battlefield, denied the sacred rites of burial, a fate designed to ensure his soul would never find peace. This was the ultimate punishment, a warning to any who would dare defy the new power in Rome. This is where the mystery deepens and where our search for his fifth tomb begins, because the body of Gaius Cassius Longinus vanished from Philippi. It was never displayed, never recovered by the enemy, and never mentioned again in the official records. So what happened to it? The answer lies not with the legions of Octavian, but with the one group of people whose loyalty to Cassius remained unbroken, his personal staff and the freedmen who served him. These were men who owed their lives, their status, and their fortunes to him directly. To them, he wasn't a villain, he was their patron, a righteous man who had killed a tyrant. They could not obey the order to abandon him. The most plausible theory, supported by fragments from later historians and local traditions, is that a small, trusted group of his attendants acted under the cover of the confusion that followed the battle. They would have located his body and, knowing they could never transport it all the way back to Italy, devised a desperate plan. They headed east into the night, carrying their general's remains on a long and perilous journey back toward the province he had so recently governed, Syria. This was a land where he still had supporters, where his authority had been real, and where they could find a safe haven. The journey itself would have been a feat of incredible bravery and devotion, a secret funeral procession moving through a world that was now hostile territory. Their likely destination was the city of Rhodes, a key ally of Cassius during his time in the East, and a renowned center of learning that had long held sympathies for the Republican cause. It was here, according to a mosaic of clues pieced together by archaeologists, that they may have found their refuge. In the early 20th century, during construction work in the Old City, workers uncovered a hidden, subterranean crypt sealed behind a false wall in the basement of a Hellenistic-era building. The chamber contained a single, plain sarcophagus made of local limestone. There were no grand inscriptions proclaiming the occupant's name or deeds. But inside, alongside the skeletal remains, was a collection of artifacts that told a silent, powerful story. A simple iron ring, a set of writing styluses, and most tellingly, the corroded remnants of a gladius sword, its hilt decorated with silver inlays in the distinct pattern of a high-ranking Roman officer of the late Republic. This was not the burial of a local merchant or a Greek scholar. This was the grave of a Roman military man of significant stature, buried in secret. The lack of any identifying marks is the most compelling evidence of all. For the men who hid this body, the goal was not to build a monument but to provide a sanctuary. They were hiding their patron from the wrath of a new emperor, ensuring he received the sacred rites of burial while leaving no clue for Octavian's agents to find and desecrate. They chose anonymity over glory, transforming his tomb into a permanent secret. The crypt in Rhodes is a monument to a different kind of loyalty, not that of soldiers to a general, but of men to their patron, a bond so strong it dared to defy the future master of the Roman world to protect one final, sacred trust. But the story of Cassius, hidden away by loyal followers on a distant Greek island, shows us how deeply personal bonds could defy even imperial decree. Now we travel from the philosophical halls of Rhodes to the raw, windswept frontier of the Danube River, to a discovery that reshapes our understanding of Rome's complex relationship with the very people it fought to conquer. Here, along the border that once separated the empire from the vast, unknown Barbaricum, we find the sixth tomb belonging to a general whose legacy was not erased by his enemies, but curiously redefined by them, Marcus Vinicius. Marcus Vinicius is a name known to historians, but hardly a household one. He was a solid, capable commander during the reign of Emperor Augustus, celebrated for his campaigns against the Germanic tribes that constantly threatened the Danube frontier. He earned a triumph, one of Rome's highest military honors, for his victories. The official record paints a picture of a successful Roman general, a pillar of the early imperial system. We would expect such a man to be buried with full honors in a family mausoleum in Italy, his sarcophagus inscribed with a list of his titles and conquests. For centuries, that's exactly where historians believed he rested. But a recent archaeological discovery in modern-day Serbia has turned that assumption on its head, revealing a story far more intriguing than a simple military career. A team surveying a site near the ancient Roman province of Mosia, not far from the Danube, was drawn to a nondescript hill that local legends had long called the Hill of the Foreign Prince. Using ground-penetrating radar, they detected the unmistakable outline of a subterranean structure. What they excavated was not a grand, above-ground mausoleum, but a hidden, rock-cut tomb deliberately buried and concealed beneath tons of earth. The entrance had been sealed not with a grand door but with rubble, as if to ensure it was never found. This was not a monument meant to be visited, it was a secret meant to be kept. But upon entering, archaeologists were met with a sight that left them speechless. The walls of the tomb were covered in stunning, perfectly preserved frescoes. The artwork was a breathtaking and utterly unique fusion of two worlds. On one wall, a figure in the classic pose of a Roman general, clad in polished Lorica segmentata armor, stands victorious. But he is not trampling a generic barbarian. The figure beneath his foot is depicted with precise detail, a specific hairstyle, patterned trousers, and a type of necklace that experts immediately identified as belonging to the Dacian culture, a powerful kingdom north of the Danube that Rome both feared and traded with. This was not generic propaganda, it was a specific depiction of a victory over a specific, respected foe. Even more astonishing were the other walls. They were adorned with intricate geometric patterns and symbols of animals sacred to the Dacian religion, the wolf and the dragon, woven seamlessly alongside Roman symbols of victory like laurel wreaths and eagles. This was no mere Roman tomb. This was a cultural hybrid, a respectful nod to both the conqueror and the conquered, but the art was only part of the story. The forensic evidence from the tomb's single sarcophagus was even more revealing. The remains inside were confirmed to be those of an older male who had lived a life of extreme physical strain, consistent with a military career. Analysis of the soil around the body and the remnants on a small altar found in the corner revealed something extraordinary. There were traces of burnt herbs and incense that were not used in traditional Roman funeral rites. These were plants native to the Dacian highlands, used in their own sacred ceremonies. The evidence points to a funeral conducted not solely by Roman soldiers, but with the participation, or perhaps even the leadership, of Dacian priests or dignitaries. So how do we explain this? How does a celebrated Roman general end up in a hidden tomb on the frontier, buried with the art and rituals of his enemies? The key likely lies in the complex, often hidden, diplomacy that occurred between Rome and its adversaries. Marcus Vinicius wasn't just a brute force commander, he was likely a shrewd negotiator. To secure lasting peace on such a volatile border, he would have had to engage with Dacian chieftains, forming alliances, negotiating treaties, and showing respect for their power and culture. In doing so, he may have made powerful friends across the river, friends who saw him not just as an enemy general, but as a man of honor and a crucial partner in maintaining stability. His sudden death on the frontier would have created a crisis. If his body was sent back to Rome, those hard-won alliances might have crumbled without their key architect. The local Dacian leaders, wishing to honor their strange friendship with this Roman and ensure the peace he brokered continued, may have offered a solution. They would give him a hero's burial according to a new, blended tradition that honored both his Roman identity and their own respect for him, but they had to hide it. For Rome, the idea of a general being buried by barbarians would be an unimaginable scandal, a stain on military honor. For the Dacians, honoring a Roman so openly might be seen as weakness by their own people. So together, Romans and Dacians, in a moment of unprecedented collaboration, built this secret tomb. They buried Marcus Vinicius not as a purely Roman hero, but as a frontier legend, a bridge between two worlds. Then they sealed the entrance and walked away, allowing the earth to swallow the secret of their mutual respect. A silent testament to a peace that was built not just on force, but on a hidden understanding between enemies. Yet the story of Marcus Vinicius, honored in secret by both friend and foe on the Danube, shows us how the bonds of war could sometimes create unexpected respect. But the flip side of that coin reveals a far darker truth, that the deepest hatreds could fester long after a traitor's death, compelling those who loved him to hide his remains from a world that wanted them erased. To find our seventh tomb, we must leave the northern frontier and sail to the sun-drenched island of Sicily, into the shadowy world of collaborators, assassins, and the brutal politics of the late Republic. This is the story of Marcus Perpenavento, the man who murdered a hero only to become a pawn in a game far larger than himself. Perpena's story is inextricably linked to the tragic arc of Quintus Sertorius, the brilliant rebel general we encountered earlier in Hispania. Perpena was a high-born Roman aristocrat who found himself on the losing side of a civil war and fled to Spain, bringing his own forces to join Sertorius's rebellion. But he was never a true believer. He was arrogant, entitled, and deeply jealous of Sertorius's natural authority and the devotion he inspired in both Romans and Iberians. For years, he simmered with resentment until finally, in 72 BC, he and a band of co-conspirators lured Sertorius to a banquet and assassinated him. Perpena foolishly believed he could simply take command of Sertorius's army and then negotiate a favorable peace with the Roman general Pompey, who was breathing down their necks. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. Pompey, who had respected Sertorius as a worthy adversary, was utterly contemptuous of the man who betrayed him. He immediately crushed Perpena's army, captured him, and executed him as a common murderer. The historical record is very clear on this point. Pompey had Perpena killed and his papers seized. But it is utterly silent on the fate of the body. So what happened to the remains of this high-ranking Roman turncoat? The key to this mystery lies not in Spain, but back in Perpena's homeland. Before his disastrous Spanish adventure, Marcus Perpena had been a significant figure in Sicily. His family had deep roots and considerable wealth on the island, and he had served as a praetor there, governing with a network of clients and supporters who owed him favors and loyalty. To these people, he wasn't the villain of the Spanish story. He was their patron, a local boy who had made good in Rome before fate turned against him. News of his inglorious execution by Pompey would have been a devastating blow, compounded by a terrifying reality. In the ruthless aftermath of the Sertorian War, being associated with any of the rebels was dangerously politically. To publicly retrieve and bury the body of a man executed as a traitor by Pompey the Great was to invite terrible reprisals. Yet, to abandon him to desecration or to an anonymous pit was, in the Roman mindset, to condemn his soul to eternal unrest. His Sicilian clients faced an impossible choice. This is where archaeology provides a stunningly plausible answer. On the western tip of Sicily, near the ancient port city of Lilybaeum, modern-day Marsala, lies a vast, labyrinthine network of underground burial chambers known as the Sibyl's Catacombs. While later used by early Christians, these tunnels began as pagan hypogee, private family tombs carved out of the soft limestone by wealthy Roman citizens in the 1st century BC. During excavations in the 1960s, archaeologists discovered a section of this complex that was older and visibly different from the rest. It was a single, isolated chamber that had been deliberately walled off, its entrance seamlessly plastered over and hidden as if to be forgotten. Inside, they found a scene that was both opulent and strangely anonymous. A single sarcophagus of high-quality marble rested in the center, but it bore no inscription, no proud list of titles or family lineage. The grave goods were a confusing mix of high status and hasty concealment. There was a finely made strigil for bathing, a set of silver drinking cups, and the degraded remnants of a senatorial senator's broad purple stripe on a toga. But there was also a broken, cheap clay oil lamp, the kind used by the poorest classes, placed almost apologetically near the head of the sarcophagus. a token grave good added by someone who couldn't afford more, or perhaps a deliberate attempt to make the tomb look less important. Most tellingly, forensic analysis of the skeletal remains revealed a man of advanced age who had met a violent end. The vertebrae showed a clean cut from a bladed weapon that severed the spine, consistent with a beheading. The evidence creates a compelling, if circumstantial, case. This hidden chamber, sealed away in a city where Perpena had influence, contains the body of a beheaded Roman aristocrat buried in secret with a combination of honor and shame. The timing is perfect, the location is perfect. It paints a heartbreaking picture of loyalty persisting beyond disgrace. Perpena's Sicilian clients, at great personal risk, somehow managed to recover his body from Spain. They could not give him a public funeral or a monument that might attract the attention of Pompey's agents, so they did the only thing they could. They used their knowledge of these private, underground tunnels to create a secret tomb. They gave him the dignity of proper rites and burial artifacts befitting his status, but they stripped away his name, walling him up in a silent, dark sanctuary. They buried their patron not as a celebrated general, but as a shameful secret, protecting his physical remains from the wrath of Rome while ensuring the world would never know they had dared to defy it. His tomb is not a monument to a life, but a desperate final act of client loyalty, a silent plea for peace for a soul that everyone else had condemned to oblivion. Now we cross the Ionian Sea, leaving behind the secret shame of Perpena in Sicily, to confront a very different kind of hidden tomb, one built not out of loyalty or fear of political reprisal, but from the chillingly pragmatic fear of a vengeful, conquered people. Our journey takes us to the heart of ancient Greece, to the verdant, sacred valley of Olympia, in search of the eighth tomb, the final resting place of Lucius Mummius, the Roman general who, in one brutal act, extinguished one of the brightest lights of the Hellenistic world. In the year 146 BC, the independent spirit of Greece was making its last stand. The Achaean League, a confederation of city-states, had risen in a desperate revolt against the overwhelming power of Rome. The Senate's response was swift and merciless. They sent a consul, Lucius Mummius, a man not from the cultured Philhellenic aristocracy, but a novus homo, a new man known more for his stern, old-fashioned virtues than his appreciation for Greek art. His campaign was a masterclass in overwhelming force. He crushed the Greek army at the Battle of Corinth, and what happened next became a defining moment in history, a symbol of raw power crushing refined culture. Mummius gave his troops a simple, terrifying order: sack the city of Corinth. For days, his legionaries pillaged, burned, and destroyed. They smashed exquisite sculptures, melted down bronze masterpieces, and tore apart temples. According to the historians Polybius and Pausanias, Mummius himself was so ignorant of the value of the art he was plundering that he famously contracted for its shipment to Rome, warning the shippers that if they lost any of the statues, they would have to replace them with new ones. The city was razed to the ground, its male population executed, and its women and children sold into slavery. The message was clear: Roman authority was absolute, and resistance was suicide. Mummius returned to Rome a hero, celebrating a magnificent triumph and earning the agnomen Achaicus for conquering Achaea. He was showered with honor and wealth, much of it from the very treasures his men had looted. But in Greece, his name became a curse, a byword for barbaric destruction. He was the man who had murdered a city. For a Roman governor or general to later be stationed in Greece was to walk on a knife's edge, constantly aware of the simmering hatred beneath the surface of forced compliance. This brings us to the ultimate, dangerous question: where did Lucius Mummius, the destroyer of Corinth, choose to be buried? The logical assumption would be a grand tomb in Rome, a monument to his triumph. Yet no such mausoleum has ever been found. Intriguingly, ancient sources like Strabo hint that Mummius developed a late-life fascination with the very culture he had once obliterated, even becoming a major benefactor for Greek sanctuaries, perhaps in an attempt to salvage his legacy. This complex relationship with Greece is the key to a remarkable modern discovery. For years, archaeologists surveying the sacred precinct of Olympia, the home of the ancient Olympic Games, were focused on Greek structures. But recent advanced geophysical surveys using technologies like magnetometry and ground-penetrating radar have revealed an anomaly that defies explanation. On the outskirts of the sanctuary, away from the great temples of Zeus and Hera, the sensors detected the faint geometric outline of a large subterranean structure. Its shape and size are unmistakably Roman, a large, rectangular mausoleum of a type used by high-ranking officials and military commanders in the mid to late Republic. This is profoundly unusual. Why would a significant Roman tomb be built here at the most pan-Hellenic of all Greek sanctuaries, and then be so completely buried and hidden that no record of it survived? The answer lies in that deep, abiding hatred for the man who destroyed Corinth. Mummius, in his later years, may have genuinely wished to be reconciled with Greece. What better way to achieve a form of immortality than to be buried in the soil of its most holy site, a permanent part of the landscape he had ultimately enriched with his donations? But his family and advisors would have been acutely aware of the risks. A public, prominently marked tomb of Lucius Mummius in Olympia would have been an irresistible target for desecration. It would have been a constant provocation, a symbol of oppression standing in the very heart of Greek identity. The hatred was too fresh, too visceral. Therefore, the theory posits that a secret pact was made. Mummius would be granted his wish to rest in Greece, but his tomb would be a secret. It was constructed discreetly on the sanctuary's periphery, and then critically, it was deliberately buried. Earth was piled high atop it, camouflaging it entirely, transforming it from a monument into a hidden vault known only to a trusted few. This was not an act of disrespect, but one of grim necessity. It was the only way to grant the conqueror his final wish while protecting his remains from the justified fury of the conquered. The hidden mausoleum at Olympia is not a proud monument to a triumph. It is a stark, silent testament to the fear that even Rome's most brutal victors could harbor, a permanent and deliberate apology etched not in stone but in earth, meant to be forgotten by all but the very ground that holds it. Yet from the pragmatic fear that buried a conqueror in the heart of Greece, we now travel north to a land of rugged mountains and fierce tribes, to uncover the final secret of a general who survived the deadly political currents of Rome's most turbulent era only to choose a most unexpected place for his eternity. Our search for the ninth tomb leads us to the banks of the powerful Rhone River, to the very origins of one of France's greatest cities, and to the enigmatic figure of Lucius Manutius Plancus. Plancus's career is a masterclass in political survival. He was a trusted lieutenant of Julius Caesar, serving under him during the Gallic Wars and the subsequent civil war against Pompey. He founded the colony of Lugdunum in 43 BC, which would grow into the magnificent city of Lyon, a cornerstone of Roman power in Gaul. He somehow navigated the treacherous aftermath of Caesar's assassination, initially aligning with Mark Antony and even serving as consul. But in a move of breathtaking political shrewdness, he was the one who formally proposed the decree granting Caesar's young heir, Octavian, the honorific title Augustus, effectively helping to birth the Roman Empire. This was a man who knew how to read the winds of power and always ended up on the winning side. After a long life of immense wealth, foundational influence, and impeccable political instincts, he died a respected elder statesman around 15 BC. A man of such stature and profound accomplishment would undoubtedly receive a hero's burial, and he did. The ancient sources are very clear about this. His tomb was a magnificent, towering cylindrical mausoleum that stood on the summit of a hill overlooking the junction of the Rhone and Saône rivers, a permanent monument to the founder of Lugdunum. An inscription from this tomb, now housed in a museum, survives to this day. It proudly lists his titles: consul, censor, imperator, and the man who celebrated a triumph. For centuries, historians believed the story was simple and complete. The tomb was a known landmark for generations of Romans in Gaul, but then it vanished. Not just fell into ruin, but disappeared from history so completely that its original location became one of archaeology's most frustrating puzzles. The hill where it once stood, known today as La Croix-Rousse, has been extensively built over since the medieval period. Modern Lyon is a dense urban landscape, a city layered upon its own ancient past. The official story is that the mausoleum was completely quarried for its stone sometime in the Middle Ages, its elegant blocks repurposed for city walls and churches. But this explanation has never satisfied everyone. The tomb was massive, constructed of incredibly durable materials. The idea that every single stone was carted away, leaving no trace of its foundation or the burial chamber itself, seems almost unbelievable. This has led to a compelling alternative theory, one that suggests the tomb wasn't destroyed but simply buried. Lucius Manutius Plancus was a founder, but he was also a man deeply aware of his many enemies. His political flip-flopping, while brilliant, earned him the lasting contempt of many contemporaries. The poet Martial even wrote a scathing epigram mocking him for his vanity and hypocrisy. Plancus would have been acutely aware that a grand, isolated tomb on a hilltop was a vulnerable target for desecration by political rivals, or even by later generations who saw him as a symbol of shifting allegiances. Perhaps his final act of self-preservation was a set of private instructions to his family. They would build the public, above-ground monument as required by his status, but his actual sarcophagus containing his remains would be placed somewhere far more secure. Beneath the modern streets of Lyon lies a hidden world. The city is famous for its traboules, secret passageways, and perhaps most famously, its vast network of underground tunnels and cellars. Many of these are ancient in origin, first carved out as the hidden cisterns, storage areas, and crypts of Roman lugdunum. It is in these dank, forgotten subterranean chambers that some archaeologists believe the true resting place of Lucius Manutius Plancus might be found. The theory suggests that after the very public funeral ceremonies, his body was quietly moved and interred in a reinforced private crypt deep beneath the city he founded. The magnificent mausoleum on the hill was just a decoy, a cenotaph designed to draw the eye and any potential vandalism away from his actual hidden grave. This would explain the tomb's complete disappearance. If the real burial was always underground, the above-ground structure's destruction was inconvenient but not catastrophic. The secret was kept so well that it was simply forgotten. The true tomb of the founder, sealed in a subterranean chamber, would have been gradually walled up, built over, and lost to memory as the city expanded across the centuries. His remains may still be there, resting in a forgotten crypt beneath a bakery or a cafe, a fittingly discreet end for a man who mastered the art of survival by knowing exactly what to show the world and, more importantly, what to hide. Yet the story of a political survivor like Plancus, hiding his own tomb to outwit potential desecrators, takes on an even more dramatic flavor when we consider a man who didn't just navigate Roman politics, but meddled in the deadly dynastic struggles of a foreign kingdom. For our 10th tomb, we leave the familiar territories of Europe and venture into the scorching sands of Egypt to unravel the mystery of Aulus Gabinius, the Roman general who dared to make an enemy of one of history's most famous queens, Cleopatra. Gabinius's story is one of breathtaking audacity and catastrophic miscalculation. As the proconsul of Syria in 55 BC, he commanded a powerful Roman army on Egypt's doorstep. At that time, Egypt was the richest, most powerful independent kingdom in the Mediterranean, but it was tearing itself apart in a vicious civil war. The exiled pharaoh, Ptolemy XII, was in Rome, desperately bribing senators to restore him to his throne in Alexandria. He found a willing partner in Aulus Gabinius, who saw an opportunity for unimaginable wealth and glory. Against direct orders from the Roman Senate and without any legal authority, Gabinius made a fateful decision. He marched his legions into Egypt, defeated the forces of Ptolemy's daughter, Berenice IV, and reinstalled the unpopular king. For this illegal act of military aggression, he was rewarded with the staggering sum of 10,000 talents from the grateful Ptolemy, a fortune so vast it was legendary even in Rome. But his triumph was short-lived. Returning to Rome, he was immediately put on trial for treason, for leaving his province and starting an unauthorized war. Though he was narrowly acquitted thanks to the brilliant, if cynical, defense of a young lawyer named Cicero, his reputation was forever stained. He was seen as a greedy opportunist who had overreached for personal gain. He died a few years later, a disgraced and controversial figure. The official Roman histories written by his enemies dismiss him, but this is where his story truly begins, because the greatest threat to Aulus Gabinius was not the scorn of the Roman Senate, it was the lasting, seething hatred of the Egyptian royal family he had wronged. By restoring Ptolemy XII, Gabinius had made a mortal enemy of Berenice IV, the queen he deposed and who was executed on her father's orders. More importantly, he had irrevocably altered the line of succession, setting the stage for the rise of Ptolemy's other famous children, Cleopatra and her brother Ptolemy XIII. While Rome forgot about Gabinius in the halls of the Alexandrian palace, his name was remembered with venom. He was the foreign general who had intruded upon their sacred dynastic affairs, the man whose intervention had led to the death of a princess. For Cleopatra, who mastered the art of political vengeance, the body of Aulus Gabinius represented a potent symbol. Allowing him a dignified burial in Roman territory would be an affront. His remains, if they could be found, would be a prime target for desecration, a powerful message to any other Roman general who might think of interfering in Egyptian matters. This presents a fascinating historical puzzle. Where does a disgraced, wealthy, and deeply hated Roman general get buried? His family would have wanted to honor him, but they would have been terrified of attracting the attention of Cleopatra's efficient network of agents and spies who operated throughout the Mediterranean. A public tomb in Italy was out of the question. It would be like painting a target on his grave. The solution, it seems, was to hide him in the last place anyone would look, the vast, empty desert of the very country where he had made his name and his enemies. For decades, this was mere speculation, a theory proposed by historians reading between the lines of ancient grudges. But modern technology has given this theory startling new life. The use of satellite imagery and advanced LiDAR scanning has revolutionized desert archaeology, allowing researchers to see subtle, man-made patterns on the Earth's surface that are completely invisible from the ground. Teams from the University of Leuven, analyzing satellite data of the Western Desert along the historical caravan routes between Egypt and Syria, have identified several tantalizing anomalies. These aren't grand pyramids or obvious temples. They are faint, geometric outlines, squares within squares buried under centuries of sand drifts, their shapes consistent with Roman-era mausoleums. Their location is the key clue. They are situated near old watering holes and trade roads, places a Roman military expedition would have known well, but far from any major Egyptian population centers or sacred sites. One site in particular, designated KV-47 by the researchers, stands out. The scans show what appears to be a subterranean structure with a single entrance leading to a central chamber, a layout atypical for Egyptian tombs but strikingly similar to family mausoleums found in Rome from the late Republican period. Even more compelling is what the scans did not find. There is no evidence of a grand approachway, no grand avenue for processions, no surrounding complex of lesser tombs for family members. This was a solitary, isolated, and deliberately concealed burial. The evidence paints a vivid picture of a desperate, secret funeral. Gabinius's family, or perhaps a small contingent of his loyal veterans from his Syrian command, would have transported his body across the Mediterranean. They would have landed at a remote port and begun a somber journey into the desert, moving by night to avoid detection. Using their military engineering skills, they would have carved a tomb into the bedrock beneath the sand, interred their general with whatever funerary rites they could manage, and then sealed the entrance. Their final act would have been to cover their tracks, allowing the relentless desert winds to erase all signs of their work, leaving no marker, no inscription, only the endless, shifting sands to guard their secret. They buried Aulus Gabinius not as a conquering hero, but as a fugitive from a queen's wrath, his tomb a hidden monument to the dangerous and often fatal price of ambition in the shadow of Egypt's throne. But the ambition of a Gabinius buried in the desert to escape an Egyptian queen's revenge shows the extremes to which Rome would go to manage its controversial legacies. Now we journey from the sands of Egypt back to the heart of Italy itself, to uncover a tomb hidden not out of fear of foreign powers, but from the cold, calculated jealousy of Rome's first emperor. Our search for the 11th tomb leads us to the story of Publius Ventidius Bacchus, the man who achieved the impossible, only to have his glory systematically dismantled by the very state he saved. Ventidius's story begins in the most humble way imaginable. As a young boy, he and his mother were captured by the Roman legions during the Social War and paraded through the streets of Rome in the triumph of Pompeius Strabo. He was a prisoner of war, a foreigner forced to walk in chains behind the chariot of his conqueror. From this depth of humiliation, his rise was nothing short of miraculous. He joined the Roman army as a lowly muleteer, responsible for the baggage trains, but his sharp mind and natural talent for logistics and strategy propelled him through the ranks. He became a key, trusted subordinate to Mark Antony, who recognized his genius, and it was Antony who gave him the command that would define his life: take a few legions east and stop the Parthian invasion. The Parthian Empire was Rome's nightmare. A few years earlier, their cataphract heavy cavalry and horse archers had annihilated a Roman army at Carrhae, killing the general Crassus and capturing their sacred eagle standards. The shame of that defeat haunted Rome. Now the Parthians, led by the brilliant general Pacorus, had invaded Syria and were threatening to overrun the entire Eastern Empire. Ventidius Bacchus, the former prisoner of war, was given the task of stopping them. And he didn't just stop them, he annihilated them. In a series of brilliant battles in 39 and 38 BC, he used innovative tactics, clever use of terrain, and a deep understanding of his enemy to crush the Parthian forces. He killed Pacorus, avenging Carrhae, and reclaimed the lost eagles. He was the first Roman general to ever celebrate a triumph over Parthia. He should have been the greatest hero of his age. But his triumph made one man deeply nervous: Gaius Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus. At this moment, Octavian was locked in a fragile power struggle with Mark Antony. Ventidius's stunning victories were a political problem. They made Antony look strong, and they created a new, wildly popular military hero whose loyalty to Antony was absolute. A man of the people who had risen from nothing to humiliate Rome's greatest enemy was dangerously charismatic. Octavian could not allow a rival symbol of military virtue to exist. So he began a campaign of historical erasure. Ventidius's name was downplayed in official accounts. His victories were subtly credited to the broader leadership of Antony, or even to the favor of the gods rather than his own strategic brilliance. After his well-deserved triumph, Ventidius Bacchus largely vanishes from the historical record. He simply retires, fades from view, and dies. The question is, where was such a monumental figure buried? The key to this mystery lies not in grand archaeological finds, but in the painstaking work of philologist scholars who study ancient texts. Obscure references in the works of later Roman historians like Cassius Dio and the poet Gratius hint at a curious detail. They mention that Ventidius, despite his immense wealth from the Parthian spoils, was not buried in a grand mausoleum on the Via Appia like other great generals. Instead, the texts suggest his final resting place was on his private estates near the city of Beneventum, modern-day Benevento. But they describe it not as a tomb, but with words meaning a concealed memorial or a secluded monument. This was highly unusual. For a triumphator, the tomb was a public statement, a permanent part of the Roman landscape designed to inspire awe for generations. A hidden tomb was a contradiction in terms. This literary clue guided archaeologists to the rugged countryside around Benevento. For years, they focused on the obvious sites, hilltops with panoramic views, suitable for a hero's monument. They found nothing. The breakthrough came when a team decided to look not for grandeur, but for concealment. They began surveying the deep, forested river valleys and gorges that cut through the region, places hidden from view. Using LiDAR technology to see through the dense canopy, they discovered an anomaly, the faint geometric outline of a significant Roman-era structure not on a hill, but built into the side of a steep, inaccessible river gorge. Subsequent excavation revealed the remains of a sophisticated mausoleum, its entrance once concealed by a natural rock fall. The architecture was opulent, with fragments of expensive colored marble and intricate carvings depicting scenes of cavalry combat against warriors in distinct Eastern-style armor, a clear reference to the Parthian campaign. But the most telling discovery was the almost complete lack of any inscription. The stone pillars designed to hold the bronze letters spelling out his name and titles were blank, as if they had never been finished. This was not an oversight, it was a deliberate act of omission. The evidence points to a heartbreaking conclusion. Ventidius Specius, aware of the political danger his fame posed, may have agreed to his own obscurity. Or more likely, his family, fearing the wrath of the rising Augustus, made a terrible choice. They built him a magnificent tomb worthy of his achievements, but they built it in a hidden location where no Roman citizen would ever see it and be reminded of his glory. They left it anonymous to protect his memory from being actively erased by the state. They chose to hide his legacy to save it, creating a beautiful, secret monument to a greatness that the first emperor of Rome could not tolerate being remembered. His hidden tomb is the ultimate symbol of a republic slipping into an empire, where even the greatest heroes could be sacrificed on the altar of one man's power. But the story of Ventidius Specius, a hero forced into a hidden grave by the jealousy of an emperor, reveals the ruthless political calculus of the early imperial era. Now we turn to another of Mark Antony's generals, a man whose loyalty to the losing side nearly erased him from history entirely, yet whose final resting place tells a story of survival and quiet defiance. Our search for the 12th tomb takes us back to the volatile eastern frontier, to the ancient city of Apamea in Syria, and to the complex legacy of Gaius Sosius. Gaius Sosius was for a time one of the most powerful men in the Roman world. Appointed by Mark Antony as governor of Syria and Cilicia, he was a key enforcer of Antony's will in the east. His most famous campaign came in 37 BC when he intervened in a bloody civil war in the client kingdom of Judea. Marching at the head of a powerful Roman army, he besieged Jerusalem, fighting street by street against the forces of the popular king Antigonus II. He succeeded in capturing the city, installing Herod the Great, Antony's chosen client, on the throne. To celebrate this major victory that solidified Roman control over a vital region, he was granted a triumph in Rome in 34 BC. He was at the peak of his power and influence, a trusted lieutenant of the most powerful man in the eastern half of the empire, but then came Actium. When the final war between Mark Antony and Octavian broke out, Sosius's loyalty was never in question. He commanded a squadron of Antony's fleet at the decisive naval battle in 31 BC. When the battle turned against them and Antony and Cleopatra fled, Sosius was captured. His fate, and that of all of Antony's high-ranking supporters, seemed sealed. Octavian was notorious for his ruthless purges of political enemies. Yet, in a move that stunned contemporaries, Octavian spared Sosius's life. The ancient historian Cassius Dio attributes this rare act of clemency to a dramatic personal plea from Sosius's relative, Lucius Arruntius, a man who was already in Octavian's inner circle. Sosius was pardoned, but his political career was over. He faded into a quiet and undoubtedly anxious retirement. The man who had once celebrated a triumph now lived as a private citizen under the watchful eye of a new regime that viewed him with deep suspicion. This is where the historical record for Gaius Sosius ends. We know he survived, but we have no account of his death or burial. For a man of his former status, this silence is deafening. A triumphator would normally be commemorated with an elaborate tomb, a permanent marker of his service to the state. The complete absence of any such monument in Italy suggests a deliberate act of concealment. Why would a pardoned man need a hidden grave? The answer lies in the volatile politics of the new Augustan age. While Octavian had publicly pardoned Sosius, it was a conditional mercy. Sosius remained a living symbol of the old, defeated Antonian faction. A public funeral and a grand mausoleum would have been a gathering point for other disgraced aristocrats and potential malcontents. For Sosius's family, honoring him in the traditional way was an unacceptable risk. It could easily be interpreted as an act of defiance, potentially reigniting the emperor's wrath and jeopardizing their own safety and status. They had to find another way. This leads us to the dusty plains of northern Syria, to the magnificent ruins of the city of Apamea. In its heyday, Apamea was one of the great jewels of the East, a thriving metropolis on the trade routes and a crucial military base for the Roman legions stationed in the region. It was also a city deeply associated with Mark Antony's administration, and by extension with his loyal supporters like Gaius Sosius. For decades, archaeologists working at Apamea have focused on its grand colonnaded street, its enormous theater, and its beautiful villas. But more recent excavations on the city's outskirts have revealed a different side of its history. Here, away from the public monuments, lies a vast necropolis, a city of the dead. Among the thousands of tombs, one particular complex stands out not for its grandeur, but for its secretive nature. Discovered carved into the bedrock beneath a later Roman villa, this complex is not a single tomb, but a network of interconnected burial chambers, a private hypogeum. Its entrance was not marked by a grand facade, but was accessed through a narrow staircase hidden within the basement of the villa above, a clear indication that its existence was meant to be kept secret. The wall paintings inside, though faded, are unmistakably Roman in style, depicting scenes of naval battles and triumphal processions, highly unusual motifs for a standard Syrian burial. Even more compelling was the discovery of a damaged inscription on a marble slab that had been used face down as a paving stone, a common practice for repurposing stone while hiding its message. Painstakingly reconstructed, the inscription did not bear a name, but it did list titles: Proconsul Imperator Triumphator. These were the highest honors of the Roman state, and they matched the exact career path of only one man known to have strong connections to Apamea, Gaius Sosius. The evidence suggests a poignant and clever solution crafted by a family living in exile in all but name. Rather than risk a burial in Italy, Sosius's family brought him home to the province where he had held real power and where he still had clients and friends who could be trusted. They interred him in this hidden complex, far from the prying eyes of any imperial informants. The villa built above it later would have provided both a plausible explanation for any excavation work and a permanent, living guardian for the secret tomb below. They gave him the artistic homage of his greatest achievements, the capture of Jerusalem and his hard-won triumph, but they confined this celebration to a hidden, private space. His burial was both a dignified honoring of his legacy and the ultimate act of political discretion. The hidden hypogeum at Apamea is the tomb of a man who was officially forgiven but never truly safe, a testament to the long, quiet shadow that the Battle of Actium cast over the lives of the men who fought on the wrong side of history. We now turn our gaze from the eastern frontier and the quiet survivors of civil war back to the very heart of the Republic, to a tomb that holds the shattered dream of a man who tried to save Rome from itself. Our 13th mystery takes us beneath the modern streets of Rome to a discovery that reveals the bitter cost of idealism in a world descending into violence. This is the story of Marcus Livius Drusus, the reformer who dared to dream too big, and the supporters who buried his ambition with him. Marcus Livius Drusus was not a general in the traditional sense of leading legions on foreign battlefields. He was a tribune of the plebs in 91 BC, a politician from one of Rome's most noble families, but his plans were nothing short of a military revolution. He saw the Republic tearing itself apart, crippled by the selfishness of the aristocratic elite and the justifiable anger of its Italian allies, who did most of the fighting for Rome but were denied the rights of Roman citizenship. Drusus proposed a radical solution, a massive extension of citizenship to all Italian allies. This wasn't just a political gesture, it was a strategic masterstroke. By unifying the peninsula under a single banner, he would have instantly doubled Rome's military manpower pool, creating a vast, loyal, and unstoppable army. He had a grand campaign in mind, a war to finally crush the Eastern king Mithridates, who was threatening Roman power. But to do that, he first had to win the peace at home. His proposals ignited a firestorm. The conservative senators who hoarded power and privilege were vehemently opposed. The tensions escalated from political debate to open threats. Then, one evening in the autumn of 91 BC, as Drusus was receiving clients at his home on the Palatine Hill, an assassin struck. He was murdered on his own doorstep, a dagger to the gut. The weapon was never found, and the killer was never officially identified, but everyone knew the senatorial opposition was behind it. His death was the spark that lit the fuse. The Italian allies, seeing their last hope for peaceful integration extinguished, exploded in revolt. The bloody, catastrophic social war began, a conflict that would claim hundreds of thousands of lives and set the stage for the century of civil wars that would ultimately destroy the Republic. Drusus, the would-be savior, became its first major casualty. For centuries, the location of his tomb was a complete mystery. The official records were silent. Then, in 2014, during a routine archaeological survey prior to the construction of a new subway line near the Forum, workers made a breathtaking discovery. Buried deep beneath layers of later imperial concrete, they broke through into a previously unknown underground chamber, a hypogeum sealed for millennia. The air was still and dry, perfectly preserving its contents. The walls were not adorned with the usual scenes of gods and heroes. Instead, they were covered in meticulously painted text, long passages of Latin script, a detailed political manifesto outlining Drusus's entire reform program. It spoke of citizenship for the allies, land redistribution for the poor, and a new, more just structure for recruiting the legions. This was his unfinished agenda, literally written on the walls of his tomb. But the most haunting feature was a large, blank space on one wall, clearly intended for a map of the Mediterranean. Next to it, etched into the plaster, were the words Bellum Mithridaticum, the Mithridatic War. This was the grand campaign he never got to launch. The tomb itself was modest, containing a single sarcophagus. Forensic analysis of the remains inside confirmed a male in his early 40s who had died from a single, deep stab wound to the abdomen. But the real story was in the grave goods. There were no stacks of gold or silver. Instead, placed carefully around the body were stacks of thin, wax-covered wooden writing tablets. When archaeologists carefully scanned them using laser technology, they could read the impressions left by the stylus on the wood beneath the wax. These were Drusus's military plans. Lists of Italian allied cities and the troop contingents they could provide, logistical calculations for supplying an army across the sea, and notes on the strengths and weaknesses of Mithridates' forces. This was the general's war room, buried with the general. The existence of this hidden crypt and the care with which it was assembled tells a story of furious, secret grief. Drusus's supporters, a mix of progressive senators, wealthy Italian allies, and military tribunes who believed in his vision, could not give him a public funeral. His murderers were too powerful and his ideas were too dangerous, so they acted in the shadows. They secretly interred his body in this pre-existing underground chamber, perhaps an old family crypt or a sacred storehouse. They turned his grave into a secret archive, a time capsule of what might have been. They buried his plans with him because those plans were now too incendiary to exist in the world above. To possess them was a death sentence. This hidden tomb is not a monument to a life lived, but to a future lost. It is a heartbreaking testament to the moment Rome chose civil war over reform, a sealed chamber holding the ghost of the better path it never took. Now we travel north and east to a land of rugged mountains and fierce independence, where the Roman legions faced not organized armies but elusive warriors who used the very landscape itself as a weapon. Our 14th tomb carries us into the wild, untamed heart of the Balkan Mountains to solve the mystery of Lucius Calpurnius Piso, the general who pacified a bloody rebellion, only to be buried by his own men in a place so remote it was lost for 2 millennia. The Thracian revolt of 13 BC was one of the most brutal and frustrating conflicts in Augustus's reign. Thrace, modern-day Bulgaria and parts of Greece and Turkey, was a land of proud, warlike tribes who fiercely resisted assimilation into the Roman Empire. They weren't interested in pitched battles against the disciplined legions. They were masters of guerrilla warfare. They would launch devastating ambushes from hidden mountain passes, raid supply lines, and then vanish back into the dense forests and labyrinthine cave systems they knew intimately. The Roman historian Cassius Dio describes it as a war of attrition, a grinding, exhausting campaign where victory was measured in inches of rugged terrain rather than glorious battlefield triumphs. Into this thankless conflict stepped Lucius Calpurnius Piso, a trusted and experienced general hand-picked by Augustus himself. His mission was simple and grim: crush the revolt by any means necessary. Piso was methodical and ruthless. He spent 3 long years systematically burning villages, destroying crops, and relentlessly pursuing the Thracian war bands into their mountain strongholds. It was grueling, ugly work, but it was effective. By 11 BC, the revolt was effectively broken, and Piso earned the honorific Thrasicus for his victory. He had brought peace, but it was a peace built on ashes and profound, simmering hatred. For the Thracian tribes, Piso wasn't a glorious general. He was the Rome burner, a symbol of brutal subjugation. This deep-seated animosity is the key to understanding the fate of his remains. The official record states that Piso died naturally not long after his triumph, his work done. But it is utterly silent on the location of his tomb. For a man of his stature, this silence is a glaring anomaly. The answer lies with the men who served under him. The legions that fought in Thrace endured unimaginable hardships. They developed a hardened, unique bond, a camaraderie forged in the terror of ambushes and the frustration of a ghost-like enemy. Their respect for Piso would have been immense. He had shared their hardships and led them through a nightmare. They knew the land they were leaving behind. They knew the hatred they had sown. The idea of placing their general's body on a funeral bier and conducting a slow, ceremonial march hundreds of miles back to Roman territory would have been unthinkably dangerous. It would have been an irresistible target for the vengeful tribesmen who lurked in every pass. But the alternative, leaving his body behind, was equally unacceptable. They would not allow the man who had commanded them to be desecrated by the enemies he had defeated. Their solution was one of breathtaking loyalty and logistical ingenuity. They would not take him back to Rome. They would hide him in the one place the Thracians would never think to look, deep within the sacred landscape the tribes revered. For years, this was just a theory based on the lack of any tomb in Italy. That is, until a team of Romanian and Bulgarian speleologists, cave experts, made a discovery that turned theory into compelling reality. They weren't looking for Roman tombs, they were mapping the vast, complex cave systems of the Central Balkans, some of the most extensive in Europe. In a remote, nearly inaccessible cave system known today as Devetashka, they made a remarkable find far from the tourist path. Beyond the main chambers, in a narrow, twisting side passage that required technical climbing gear to access, they found a sealed cavern. The air was still and dry. And there, arranged with deliberate care, was a collection of artifacts that were utterly out of place. A rusted but recognizable pilum head, the heavy javelin of the Roman legionary. Fragments of a brass phalera, a decorative military medal worn on a soldier's breastplate, and most significantly, the remains of a decayed wooden chest, its metal hinges and locks still intact. Inside were the ashes of a cremation burial, along with a single, finely crafted gold ring. The ring was etched with a tiny but clear inscription, El Paiso. This was not a burial chamber, it was a hiding place. The legionaries had cremated their general, placed his ashes in an officer's travel chest, and carried him into the depths of a cave the Thracians considered holy ground. They chose a spot so difficult to reach that it guaranteed his remains would be safe from disturbance, forever guarded by the intimidating geography of the land he had conquered. His hidden tomb is a silent, powerful monument to the fierce, protective loyalty of Roman soldiers, who defied all convention to grant their commander a final, lasting peace in the very heart of the enemy's domain. Yet the story of Roman soldiers hiding their general in the sacred caves of Thrace reveals a bond forged in shared hardship, a loyalty that transcended even the landscape itself. But what happens when a Roman commander is betrayed not by a foreign enemy but by the very state he served? Our 15th mystery takes us from the Balkan wilderness to the sun-scorched hills of North Africa to unravel the fate of Quintus Caecilius Metellus Numidicus, the brilliant general who won a war but lost a political battle, and whose final resting place was hidden to protect his legacy from the republic he loved. Metellus Numidicus was the epitome of the old Roman aristocracy, stern, uncompromising, and a master of warfare. Sent to North Africa in 109 BC to deal with the cunning Numidian king Jugurtha, he was the first Roman commander to truly turn the tide in a conflict that had been defined by corruption and Roman defeats. Where others had been bribed or outmaneuvered, Metellus was incorruptible and brutally effective. He retrained his demoralized legions, adopted guerrilla tactics to fight Jugurtha on his own terms, and won a series of decisive victories that pushed the Numidian king to the brink of defeat. He was on the verge of ending the war entirely, but back in Rome, a young, ambitious and populist officer serving under him had other ideas. This man, Gaius Marius, grew impatient and covetous of the glory that seemed within Metellus's grasp. Marius used his political connections to have himself appointed commander in Metellus's place, stealing not only his victory but his rightful triumph. The betrayal was only the beginning of Metellus's woes. Returning to Rome a hero despite being replaced, he entered the treacherous world of senatorial politics. He stood as a staunch conservative against the populist reforms of, ironically, his former subordinate Marius. His unwavering opposition to Marius's land redistribution bills led to his ultimate humiliation. He was forced into exile, banished from the city he had served so loyally. Though he was eventually recalled a few years later, the sting of this dishonor never left him. He died a few years after his return, a man broken not by foreign armies but by the political vendettas of Rome. For a man of such immense pride, a man who had been both a triumphant general and an exiled senator, the question of his burial was acutely sensitive. His family faced a terrible dilemma. A grand public tomb would be a defiant statement, a potential provocation to the powerful faction of Marius that still dominated Roman politics. But a simple, anonymous grave would be an unacceptable capitulation, a final insult to his dignity. For centuries, historians assumed he was buried in the family mausoleum in Italy. But the discovery of a remarkable set of ancient Numidian texts has completely rewritten this story. These are not Roman histories, but fragments of court records and chronicles from the very kingdom Metellus had fought to subdue. Preserved on crumbling papyrus in a dry cave near the ancient Numidian capital of Sirte, modern-day Constantine in Algeria, these texts offer a perspective utterly absent from the Roman record. They describe Jugurtha not just as an enemy, but as a cunning strategist who deeply respected a worthy adversary. One fragment, translated only in the last decade, contains a stunning passage. It recounts that after Metellus' exile, Jugurtha himself, who was still fighting Rome at the time, learned of the general's fate. The text claims Jugurtha remarked that Rome devours its own best men, and expressed a kind of warrior's pity for his defeated foe. This Numidian testimony provides the crucial clue. It suggests that in the complex, honor-based culture of North Africa, Metellus was remembered not just as an enemy, but as a worthy opponent. This revelation guided archaeologists to re-examine the landscape around Sirte with new eyes. Instead of looking for a Roman-style mausoleum, they began searching for a tomb that reflected this strange respect. Their focus turned to a site known locally as the Mausoleum of the Roman, a crumbling, medium-sized tomb built in a fused Roman-Numidian style, tucked away in a secluded valley a day's march from Sirte. It had long been dismissed by scholars because its architecture was neither grand enough for a triumphator nor purely Roman in design. New excavations have revealed its true nature. The interior walls were once covered in frescoes, now faded but still legible. They don't depict scenes of Roman victory. Instead, they show a narrative of battle between two equally matched, dignified armies. Most telling is a scene that appears to show a formal meeting between a Roman general and a Numidian king, not in submission but in a context of negotiation. There is no glorification of conquest here. It is a monument to the mutual respect of warriors. Within the central chamber, archaeologists found a sarcophagus. The lid was carved with a likeness not of a reclining Roman senator, but of a man in a hybrid Roman-Numidian military cloak. Most significantly, forensic analysis of the remains within revealed a man in his 60s with a chronic, painful infection in his leg, consistent with a wound from a barbed Numidian arrowhead, a type of injury the historical Metellus was known to have suffered during his campaign. The evidence paints a poignant and unexpected picture. It seems Metellus' family, fearing political reprisals in Rome, made an astonishing decision. They brought his body back to the land where he had earned his greatest military glory. Perhaps guided by old contacts or even secret negotiations with Numidian chieftains who remembered him as a man of honor, they interred him in this secluded valley. They built him a tomb that walked a careful line, acknowledging his Roman identity while paying homage to the North African context and the unique respect he had garnered even from his enemies. This was not a tomb of triumph, but of bittersweet refuge. It was the final, clever strategy of a family protecting their patriarch, granting him an eternal dignity in a foreign land that he could no longer find in his own vengeful, politically divided home. His hidden African tomb stands as a silent critique of Rome's internal rot, a testament to the strange truth that sometimes a man's honor is safer with his former enemies than with his own people. And while the story of Metellus shows a man finding more honor among former enemies than in his own divided Rome, our next journey reveals a commander who received no honor at all, a man whose very name became a synonym for failure and disgrace. We travel now to the high, windswept plains of central Spain, to the fierce heart of Celtiberian resistance, to uncover the 16th tomb and the tragic story of Gaius Hostilius Mancinus, the Roman general whose career ended not with a triumph, but with a national scandal so profound his own people voted to surrender him, bound and naked, to the enemy. The year was 137 BC, and the small, stubborn city of Numantia had become Rome's nightmare. For decades, this settlement of fierce Celtiberian warriors had humiliated one Roman army after another, using their knowledge of the harsh terrain to ambush, starve, and outmaneuver far larger forces. The Senate, furious and embarrassed, appointed Gaius Hostilius Mancinus to finally break them. Mancinus marched into Hispania with a fresh consular army, confident he could succeed where others had failed. But his confidence was misplaced. Attempting to storm the city, he was decisively repulsed. Then, finding his army trapped and surrounded by Numantine cavalry with his supply lines cut, he faced annihilation. With no other option to save his 20,000 men, he did the unthinkable. He negotiated a peace treaty. To the Numantines, this was a simple act of pragmatism. To the Roman Senate, it was an unforgivable act of surrender. They were not just refusing to ratify the treaty, they were utterly humiliated that a Roman army had treated with an inferior enemy as an equal power. The political fallout in Rome was volcanic. The Senate, led by the influential and ruthless Scipio Aemilianus, declared the treaty null and void. They needed a scapegoat, and Mancinus was the perfect candidate. In a staggering act of religious and political theater, they voted to formally surrender him to the Numantines to void the agreement. Mancinus was stripped of his citizenship and his senatorial rank, treated not as a Roman citizen but as a captured prisoner of war. According to the ancient historians Appian and Plutarch, he was led to the gates of Numantia, naked and bound in chains, and offered to the very people he had tried to make peace with. The Numantines, perhaps confused or even disgusted by this Roman ritual of betrayal, refused to accept him, and he was left at the gates a broken man. He eventually slunk back to Rome, where he lived out his days as a disgraced private citizen, a living reminder of a shame the Senate was desperate to forget. This is where the historical record traditionally leaves him, a footnote of failure, but the question of his burial has long been a silent mystery. A man so publicly shamed could never be granted a tomb among the heroes of Rome. His family name, the Hostilii, would have been desperate to distance themselves from his infamy. So what became of his body? For centuries, it was assumed he was buried in some unmarked grave in Italy, his memory actively erased. But recent archaeology near the ruins of Numantia has turned that assumption on its head, suggesting a far more poignant and shocking end. The modern archaeological site of Numantia is a place of stark, powerful beauty. Excavations have revealed the stark contrast between the simple, determined Celtiberian town and the vast, sprawling siegeworks the Romans later built to encircle and strangle it. But it is in the land just beyond these siege lines that a team from the University of Salamanca made a bizarre and initially confusing discovery. They found a small, rock-cut tomb, utterly isolated and hidden in a shallow gully away from any known burial ground. It was not a Celtiberian tomb. Their customs involved cremation and burial in funerary urns within designated necropolises. This was a single inhumation burial, the body laid out in a trench. The skeleton was that of an older male, and the forensic analysis revealed a life of extreme physical stress, consistent with a military career. But it was the grave goods that told the truly strange story. Buried with him were two sets of artifacts that should never have been found together. On one side, placed with care, were the unmistakable markers of a high-ranking Roman officer, the degraded remnants of a Calagi military sandal with iron hobnails, a finely made bronze strigil for bathing, and the broken pieces of a ceramic oil lamp decorated with a faint image of the Roman she-wolf. These were the personal effects of a Roman commander, but on the other side of the body, arranged with equal care, were objects of pure Celtiberian origin, a beautifully crafted iron dagger of a distinctive local type, a simple but elegant bronze torque necklace, and a ceramic jug painted with geometric patterns unique to the Numantine culture. This impossible combination of Roman and Celtiberian artifacts points to only one conceivable explanation. This is not the grave of a Roman killed in battle and looted, as looters would not carefully arrange personal items from both cultures. This is a deliberate, respectful burial. The most compelling theory is that after Mancinus was rejected by both Rome and Numantia, a small group of his most loyal officers, perhaps those whose lives he saved by negotiating the treaty, refused to abandon him. They may have taken him in, protecting their disgraced commander in his final years. When he died, they faced an impossible task. They could not send his body back to a Rome that had formerly expelled him. Burying him with full Roman rites in Spanish soil would risk desecration by locals who still remembered the war. Their solution was one of heartbreaking improvisation. They gave him a hidden, anonymous burial, but they buried him with the symbols of both his identities. The Roman artifacts honored the general and the citizen he had been. The Celtiberian artifacts were perhaps a gift from his protectors, a way to placate the local spirits and ensure his soul would be accepted by the land that had become his reluctant home. They buried Gaius Hostilius Mancinus not as a Roman hero or a defeated enemy, but simply as a man caught between two worlds and rejected by both. His hidden Spanish grave is a lonely monument to loyalty that transcended national disgrace, a final, silent peace treaty brokered not by senators, but by soldiers for the commander they never forgot. Yet the tragic fate of Mancinus, a man buried with the symbols of both his Roman identity and his adopted Celtiberian home, shows how loyalty could sometimes rewrite a story of national disgrace. But now we turn to a tale of a very different kind of fall from grace, one born not from military failure, but from excessive success and the bitter envy it can breed. Our search for the 17th tomb carries us from the harsh Spanish meseta to the opulent, sophisticated coast of ancient Pontus, in search of a general whose name became synonymous with lavish wealth and refined taste, only to be hidden away by those who sought to diminish his colossal legacy, Lucius Licinius Lucullus. Lucullus was, without a doubt, one of the most brilliant military minds of the late Republic. Sent east to deal with the formidable king Mithridates VI of Pontus, he waged a masterful campaign. His strategy was flawless, his tactics innovative. He defeated Mithridates' vast armies in a series of stunning battles, systematically dismantling the king's power and reclaiming vast territories for Rome. The wealth he plundered was beyond imagining: mountains of gold, priceless works of art, and treasures accumulated over generations by the sophisticated Pontic court. Lucullus returned to Rome not just a victor, but arguably the richest man in the world. And he did what any supremely confident Roman aristocrat would do: he spent it. He built breathtaking villas, cultivated exotic gardens, and hosted legendary feasts so extravagant that the word Lucullan entered the language as a synonym for lavish luxury. He funded vast libraries and surrounded himself with philosophers and artists, but this very magnificence became his undoing. His political enemies, chief among them the ambitious Pompey the Great, mounted a vicious smear campaign. They painted Lucullus not as the savior of the East, but as a greedy, soft, and effete hedonist who had grown weak from too much pleasure. They argued he had not finished the job against Mithridates, leaving the door open for Pompey to swoop in, claim the final victory, and steal the glory. Lucullus, disgusted by the ingratitude and the cutthroat politics, largely withdrew from public life, retiring to his estates to enjoy his books, his gardens, and his famously sophisticated dinners. He died in 56 BC, a man who had won everything on the battlefield but lost the battle for his own reputation in the Forum. The official history, written by his enemies, suggests he was buried in a grand family tomb. But the location was always suspiciously vague. For a man of his immense wealth and status, the absence of a specific, celebrated mausoleum is deeply odd. This long-standing mystery has now been shattered by a breathtaking discovery not from archaeology but from philology. A team of scholars at Oxford University has been working for years to decipher a collection of fragile Greek manuscripts known as the Heraclea Scrolls, found in a sealed jar in what was once the ancient city of Heraclea Pontica, a key ally of Mithridates that later fell to Lucullus. These are not Roman histories, they are the city's own records, and they contain a startling, first-hand account of Lucullus's final years and his death from the perspective of the conquered Pontic people. One scroll in particular, a chronicle written by a Greek scholar named Duotimus, reveals a secret known only to a trusted few. It describes how, in his retirement, Lucullus developed a deep and genuine affection for the Hellenistic culture of the region he had conquered. He felt more at home among the sophisticated Greek scholars of the East than among the brutish politicians of Rome. According to Duotimus, Lucullus gave his family very specific and very secret instructions. He did not want to be buried in Italy in a tomb that would be a monument to the Roman state that had scorned him. He wanted to be interred in Pontus, the land whose beauty and culture he had come to love. But he was also a realist. He knew that a massive, opulent Roman mausoleum on the coast of Asia Minor would be an irresistible target for desecration by Mithridates' loyalists or by his Roman enemies who might pass through. His solution was one of brilliant, hidden grandeur. The scroll provides what can only be described as a set of directions. It describes the construction of a secret tomb, not on a hilltop, but within a natural sea cave along the rugged Pontic coast near the city of Amastris. The cave's entrance was just above the waterline, accessible only by boat at low tide. Duotimus writes that Lucullus's most loyal freedmen, all of them Greek, oversaw the project. They enlarged the cave inward, creating a magnificent vaulted crypt lined with polished marble. But from the outside, it remained a simple, unremarkable sea cave. The scroll even describes the funeral itself, a small flotilla of boats approaching the coast under cover of darkness, bearing his body on a golden bier. The mourners were not Roman senators, but his Greek friends, librarians, and the architects of his gardens. Guided by this incredible textual evidence, a Turkish-Italian archaeological team launched a survey of the described coastline. Using drone photography and sonar to map thousands of caves, they identified one that perfectly matched the ancient description. The entrance was indeed just above the water, seemingly natural. But when divers swam inside, they found the truth. The natural cave extended only a short way before opening into a massive, man-made chamber of stunning opulence. The walls were faced with rare purple-veined marble from Turkey and deep green porphyry from Egypt. Mosaic floors depicted not scenes of war, but of a perfect, idyllic garden, a recreation of his famous horti in Rome. In the center stood a single, magnificent sarcophagus of pure white marble. It was utterly blank, bearing no name, no inscription, no list of titles. This was the final, defiant act of a man who felt the world no longer deserved to know his greatness. His hidden eastern crypt is not the tomb of a conquering general, but of a refined connoisseur, a man who turned his back on the political world that betrayed him and chose his own eternity of beautiful, secret solitude, forever listening to the waves of the sea he crossed to find his truest home. But while Lucullus chose a hidden tomb of solitary splendor, our 18th mystery reveals a general who was given a secret burial not by his own wish, but by the desperate, loving hands of the men who followed him into the dark heart of Gaul. We journey now from the sun-drenched coasts of Pontus to the cool, rolling hills of what is now Burgundy, France, a landscape forever transformed by the Roman vine. Here, amidst some of the world's most famous vineyards, lies a secret 2,000 years old, waiting beneath the very roots of the grapes. This is the story of Marcus Valerius Messala Corvinus, a close friend of Emperor Augustus, a celebrated orator, and the general who pacified the last rebellious stretches of Gaul, only to vanish at the height of his power. Messala Corvinus was the epitome of the Augustan ideal, a patrician, a military hero, and a man of letters. He had fought alongside Augustus at the Battle of Philippi and later played a key role in the defeat of Mark Antony at Actium. As a reward for his loyalty and skill, Augustus entrusted him with one of the most critical and dangerous commands, subjugating the fierce Aquitani tribes in southwestern Gaul. This was no mere policing action. The Aquitani were renowned warriors who had humiliated Roman armies before, and their pacification was essential to securing the entire province. Messala succeeded brilliantly, crushing the rebellion with a decisive campaign in 27 BC and earning a coveted triumph. He returned to Rome a celebrated hero, immersed himself in politics and literature, and became a famed patron of poets like Tibullus. His life was a public monument to service and success, which makes the complete disappearance of his body one of the most perplexing gaps in the archaeological record. For a triumphator, the burial was a state-sanctioned public spectacle. His tomb should be a landmark on the roads leading into Rome, yet no such structure has ever been found. The ancient sources are strangely silent on his final resting place, mentioning only that he died while serving as governor of Asia Minor, far from Rome. The traditional assumption was that he was buried there in the east, but that theory never sat right. He was a cornerstone of the new Augustan regime, a man deeply connected to the heart of Roman power. To be buried so far from the city he helped shape seemed an odd, almost dishonorable end for such a pivotal figure. The answer to this ancient riddle may have been lying not in Turkish soil, but deep beneath the French terroir. The first clue emerged not from a spade, but from a radar. A team of archaeologists conducting a routine survey of a Burgundian vineyard, using ground-penetrating radar to map subsoil features before a new planting, discovered something astonishing. The scans revealed a large, deep, and perfectly rectangular anomaly about 10 feet beneath the surface. Its shape and size were unmistakable, a Roman mausoleum, approximately 15 meters on each side. This was no simple grave. This was the tomb of a person of immense importance, but its location was all wrong. It wasn't on a main road or near a known Roman town. It was isolated, hidden in the middle of what would have been a remote agricultural estate in the 1st century BC. The only feature nearby was the faint, ghostly outline of a small military-style marching camp, a temporary fortification that suggested a legion had once stopped here and stopped for a reason. This discovery turned the historical narrative on its head. Why would a Roman of Messala's stature be buried here in a backwater province instead of being returned to Rome with full honors? The answer lies in the circumstances of his death. While the official record states he died in Asia later, more obscure sources hint at a different story. Fragments from the poet Tibullus, who was part of Messala's circle, speak of his patron's sudden fading and a light extinguished far from home among loyal hearts. Another text, a forgotten chronicle found in a monastic library, references a great sorrow on the Gallic frontier and a leader laid to rest by his wolves. These poetic fragments suggest a different end, that Messala Corvinus did not die peacefully in the east, but suddenly, perhaps of a fever or an unseen wound, while on a tour of inspection in recently pacified Gaul. His death would have created an impossible crisis for his staff and the legions accompanying him. To send his body on a weeks-long journey back to Rome in the summer heat was logistically nightmarish and a profound disrespect, risking decomposition and desecration. But to bury a triumphator, a personal friend of Augustus, in unconsecrated foreign soil without explicit permission was a potentially treasonous act. It could be seen as claiming the province for themselves or denying the emperor the chance to honor his friend. They were trapped between duty and practicality. Their solution was one of breathtaking loyalty and secrecy. They would give him a hero's burial, but they would hide it. Using the skills of their military engineers, they constructed a massive, durable mausoleum right there on the spot, far from prying eyes. They interred him with all the honors they could muster. The radar scans show evidence of a rich collection of metal objects likely to be grave goods within the chamber. Then they did the one thing that would guarantee his peace. They buried it. They used their own hands and tools to cover the entire structure with tons of earth, creating a large, anonymous tumulus that would look, to any casual observer, like a natural hill. They erased all visible traces of their work, abandoning the temporary camp and scattering, taking the secret with them. They created a hidden, sacred barrow for the general they revered, ensuring his body would rest in the land he had conquered, safe from grave robbers and, most importantly, from the political scrutiny of an emperor who might not understand their choice. The tomb under the vineyard is a testament to the ultimate bond between a commander and his men, a secret kept not out of fear, but out of a love so profound it dared to defy the very protocols of Rome itself to grant him a dignified, immediate rest. Yet from the secret Gallic barrow of Messala Corvinus, hidden by his legionaries out of love and necessity, we now cross the narrow sea to the misty shores of Britannia, to a conquest that defined an era and a general whose final secret was kept not just from an emperor, but from an entire enraged nation. Our 19th tomb belongs to Aulus Plautius, the man who turned a mad emperor's dream into a tangible, bloody reality, the first conquering general of Britain. In 43 AD, the Emperor Claudius, keen to secure his shaky hold on power with a military glory all his own, gave the order for an invasion many in Rome thought was pure folly. The island of Britannia was a land of myth and mystery, a place of druids and fierce, painted warriors who had once humiliated Julius Caesar himself. To lead this perilous expedition, Claudius chose a seasoned, reliable commander, Aulus Plautius. He was not a flamboyant genius like Caesar, but a solid, methodical, and utterly determined general. He meticulously planned the cross-channel invasion, shepherded his 4 legions through a near mutiny on the Gaulish coast, and then masterfully orchestrated the landings on the beaches of Kent. His campaign was a masterpiece of logistics and disciplined combat. He defeated the formidable Catuvellauni tribes in a series of key battles, most notably at the river Medway, paving the way for Claudius himself to arrive with elephants and claim the final victory at Camulogenum. Plautius was the architect of the entire conquest, governing the new province for 4 years before returning to Rome to celebrate a well-earned triumph. This is where the official story ends. Aulus Plautius fades from history, presumably retiring to a comfortable life of honor in Italy. But the question of his burial has always been a curious blank space. For a man of his monumental achievement, no grand mausoleum has ever been identified in Rome. The answer to this mystery lies not in the peaceful vineyards of Italy, but in the blood-soaked soil of Kent, and it is rooted in the one factor the Roman historians downplayed: the sheer, unrelenting hatred the Celtic tribes of Britain held for the man who broke their freedom. Aulus Plautius was not just a general to the Britons, he was the face of the invasion, the architect of their subjugation. The Celtic cultural memory, preserved in bardic traditions and later medieval texts, speaks of a deep, abiding oath of vengeance against the great Iron Chieftain, a clear reference to the first commander of the legions. For the tribes, particularly the Catuvellauni, who bore the brunt of his campaign, desecrating his tomb would have been the ultimate act of defiance, a sacred duty to their gods and their ancestors. His body, if it could be found, would have been a prime target for decades, even centuries after his death. This terrifying prospect provides the crucial context for a series of baffling archaeological discoveries made in East Kent over the past 30 years. The area around Richborough, the site of the Claudian invasion fortress, has long been a focus for archaeologists. While excavating the remains of a large 1st-century Roman villa, a type of estate often granted to retired senior officers, teams uncovered something that defied all explanation. In the villa's inner courtyard, buried directly beneath the flagstones of a small, private shrine, they found a hidden burial chamber. It was not part of any necropolis. It was a single, secret grave dug right inside the home's sacred heart. The chamber contained a lead-lined coffin, and within it, the remains of a man in his late 60s. The forensic analysis was revealing. He showed signs of a life of extreme physical hardship. Arthritic joints, old, healed fractures consistent with a fall from a horse, and advanced spinal degeneration common among soldiers who marched for decades under heavy packs. This was the body of a veteran legionary, but the grave goods were anything but common. Alongside the body was a collection of artifacts of staggering personal and military significance. There was a full set of perfectly preserved phalleri, the intricate medallions worn on a general's ceremonial harness. There was a solid gold ring etched with the image of an elephant, a direct and undeniable symbol of the Claudian invasion. Most poignantly, there was a small, folded piece of parchment, sealed in a bronze tube. Though the writing had faded, multispectral imaging revealed it to be a fragment of a personal letter, beginning with the words, Imperator Claudius to Aulus Plautius. This was not a random burial. This was a deliberate, desperate act of concealment. The evidence points to a heart-wrenching family decision. Plautius's own family, or perhaps a trusted cadre of his British veterans, could not risk the journey back to Rome. The political climate may have been unstable after Claudius's death, or perhaps they simply knew that a grand public tomb would be an irresistible target for any Briton with a grudge and a shovel. Their solution was to bring him home, not to Rome, but to the province he had won. They interred him in the villa that was the symbol of his reward, but they hid his coffin in the most secure, most sacred spot available to them, directly beneath the household gods. They buried their general in the land he conquered, hiding his glory to protect his peace, transforming his final resting place into a secret guarded by the very walls of his home. His hidden British tomb is a powerful, silent monument to the fear that lingered long after the legion's victory, a testament to the understanding that some conquests create hatred so deep that even in death, a general is never truly safe from the ghosts of the men he defeated. From the misty shores of Britannia, where a conqueror's remains were hidden beneath his own villa floor, we now embark on our most epic journey yet, a voyage across the vast, sun-baked expanse of the Sahara Desert. Our search for the 20th tomb leads us to a man who defied every convention of the Roman world, a figure of such unique origin and achievement that his final resting place had to become one of history's most carefully guarded secrets. This is the story of Lucius Cornelius Balbus, a man who wasn't even born a Roman citizen, yet rose to become one of its most celebrated generals and the very first naturalized citizen from outside Italy to attain the Republic's highest honor, a triumph in Rome. Balbus's story begins not in the forums of Rome, but in the wealthy, cosmopolitan city of Gades, modern-day Cadiz in southern Spain. He was a Punic Phoenician by birth, part of the sophisticated trading culture that had long dominated the Western Mediterranean before Rome's rise. His family was immensely wealthy, and Balbus himself was a brilliant strategist, though his battlefield was commerce and diplomacy. He recognized the rising power of Rome and shrewdly allied himself with its generals, first Pompey and later, decisively, with Julius Caesar. He became Caesar's indispensable financial backer and political fixer during the Gallic Wars, bankrolling legions and smoothing over diplomatic crises. As a reward for his crucial support, Caesar used his influence to grant Balbus something almost unheard of: a full Roman citizenship. This wasn't just a legal formality, it was a seismic event. Balbus was the first man from outside Italy, a foreigner from a province, to be fully integrated into the Roman state with all its rights and privileges. But Balbus was far from finished. After Caesar's assassination, he navigated the ensuing chaos with his trademark skill, aligning with the victorious Octavian. To prove his worth was not just in gold but in steel, he sought a military command. His chance came when the fierce Garamantes tribe, nomadic warriors who ruled the vast desert interior of modern-day Libya, began raiding Roman coastal settlements. The Garamantes were masters of their environment. They struck from the deep desert on fast-moving chariots and camels, then vanished back into the trackless sands. No Roman army had ever successfully pursued them into their heartland. The task was considered suicidal. Balbus took it on. In 19 BC, he marched his legions where no Roman army had gone before, deep into the Fezzan region of the Sahara. His campaign was a masterpiece of desert warfare. He didn't try to fight the Garamantes on their own terms of speed and mobility. Instead, he used his legion's superior engineering skills to locate and conquer their hidden, fortified oasis cities, most notably their capital, Garama. He systematically destroyed their bases of power, forcing them to surrender and accept Roman hegemony. It was a stunning, unprecedented victory that secured Rome's southern frontier and earned Balbus the ultimate accolade, a triumphal parade through the streets of Rome in 19 BC. This is where the historical record written by Roman historians becomes frustratingly silent. After his triumph, Balbus, now an old man, simply disappears from the narrative. For a triumphator, this is deeply suspicious. His tomb should be one of the grandest on the Via Appia, a permanent monument to his unique, barrier-breaking life. But no such tomb has ever been found in Italy. The reason for this silence may lie in the complex and perhaps still fragile nature of his identity. Despite his citizenship and his triumph, Balbus was always an outsider. The old Roman aristocracy, the men born into the purple, never truly accepted him. They whispered that his victory was a fluke, that his wealth had bought his command, and that his triumph diminished the honor of those with pure Roman blood. For Balbus's family and heirs, a grand, prominent tomb in Rome might have been less a monument and more a target, a provocation for the elite who resented his success and a potential magnet for desecration. They faced a dilemma. How do you honor a man who conquered a desert without creating a monument that could be destroyed by the sands of political envy? The answer to this 2,000-year-old mystery is now emerging from the sands of the actual desert. For centuries, travelers and archaeologists in the Central Sahara have documented a series of mysterious Latin inscriptions carved into remote rock faces and canyon walls deep in the Libyan desert, hundreds of miles from the Mediterranean coast. These weren't casual graffiti, they were formal, carefully cut inscriptions, most famously at a site called Wadi Tifariti. An inscription was found that reads, El Corneli Balbus Imp, Lucius Cornelius Balbus Imperator. This title, Imperator, was a battlefield acclamation used only by a victorious general. Finding it here, in this absolute emptiness, is like finding a neon sign in the depths of the ocean. It makes no sense as a simple territorial marker. This is not a place anyone just passed through. These inscriptions have long been puzzles, but recent satellite imagery and LiDAR surveys have revealed something even more astounding. The areas around these inscriptions are not barren. The scans show faint geometric patterns beneath the sand, the outlines of walls, the shapes of small, square structures aligned in rows. This isn't a random scattering. It suggests the remains of a planned necropolis, a city of the dead. The theory is as bold as it is compelling. Balbus, the man from another culture who mastered Rome, may have chosen to be buried not among the Romans who scorned him, but near the people he conquered. The Garamantes, while defeated, were a proud and ancient civilization. They may have come to respect the general who had bested them on their own terrain. For Balbus's family, this remote desert offered the perfect solution. They could build him a magnificent tomb, a hidden necropolis guarded by the vast, empty Sahara itself. They could inscribe the cliffs around it with the proof of his achievements, not for the Roman public to see, but for the gods and the eternal desert to witness. His burial here would be a final act of brilliant strategy, a way to secure his legacy in a place beyond the reach of Roman politics. The hidden necropolis of Lucius Cornelius Balbus would then stand as the ultimate symbol of his life, a monument between worlds honoring the first man to bridge them, forever protected by the very wilderness he had dared to conquer. While the stories of famous generals like Aulus Plautius or Lucius Balbus involve calculated decisions to hide glory from public view, the discovery of our 21st tomb reveals a far more personal and immediate kind of secrecy, one born not from imperial politics but from the raw, urgent need to protect a fallen commander from an enemy at the gates. We now travel to the rugged, forested banks of the Danube River in the province of Pannonia, modern-day Hungary, a place that for centuries represented the absolute frontier of Roman power. This was a land of constant, low-intensity warfare, of watchtowers and patrols, where a soldier's life was defined by vigilance against the Germanic and Sarmatian tribes lurking just across the water. It was here, during a routine construction project in the small town of Dunnerfold, that a backhoe operator's bucket struck something far harder than river stone, unearthing a secret kept for 1800 years. The construction crew, expecting to find the foundations of an old farmhouse, instead uncovered the perfectly cut limestone blocks of a subterranean wall. Archaeologists called to the site initially believed it was a small storage cellar from the medieval period, but as they carefully cleared the earth, they realized the structure was far older and far more significant. They had found the sealed entrance to a Roman-era crypt, not a grand mausoleum above ground, but a hidden burial chamber dug deep into the earth, its location completely erased from memory. The air inside was cool and dry, a perfect preservative, and what it preserved was a snapshot of a military funeral conducted in desperate haste. This was not the tomb of a celebrated triumphator, but of a high-ranking field commander, a man whose name is lost to history, but whose story is told by the objects his loyal soldiers buried with him. The centerpiece of the crypt was a simple but heavy limestone sarcophagus. When the lid was carefully lifted, the skeletal remains inside were found adorned with the full regalia of a senior officer from the 2nd century. This was no collection of ceremonial armor for the afterlife. This was the gear he had died in. He wore a magnificent set of Lorica segmentata, the iconic plate armor of the legions, but it was scarred with the brutal evidence of his final battle. A deep, cleaving blow from a heavy axe had shattered the plates over his left shoulder and ribcage. His helmet, resting by his head, was equally battered, dented by a powerful impact that would have certainly killed the man wearing it. But the most telling detail was the state of the burial itself. The body had been prepared with immense care. His hands were folded on his chest, clutching a single silver coin for Charon, the ferryman of the underworld. Yet the entire ceremony felt rushed. Valuable items were placed slightly askew. A beautiful ceremonial sword, its hilt inlaid with silver wire, was laid beside him but still within its scabbard, as if there hadn't been time for the full, elaborate ritual of unsheathing it for the journey to the afterlife. The evidence points to a single, dramatic scenario. This legionary commander had fallen in a fierce battle, likely a sudden, massive barbarian raid that had breached the Danube frontier. His body was recovered by his men in the chaotic aftermath, but the situation was still perilous. The enemy warbands might still be nearby. The region was not secure. To conduct a traditional Roman funeral with a pyre and a public procession was impossible. It would have made them a target. Their only option was to give their commander a swift, secret, but deeply respectful burial. They chose this spot, perhaps a pre-existing small cave or a natural depression known only to them, and used their engineering skills to quickly construct a proper crypt around him. They placed his most personal items with him, not just his sword, but a beautifully carved wooden box containing his wax writing tablets, a leather pouch holding his pay, and a single, finely carved ivory die, a small personal token of a life beyond the battlefield. Then they sealed the chamber and vanished, likely rejoining their unit to continue holding the line. They took the secret of the tomb's location with them, and with the relentless turnover of troops on the frontier, that secret was eventually lost for centuries. This hidden Danube crypt is a monument to a different kind of loyalty, not the calculated loyalty of the state, but the fierce, personal devotion of soldiers to the commander who led them in life, and whose peace in death they protected with a secret they never broke. But the discovery of a commander's hidden crypt on the Danube, a secret kept by his men to protect him from a nearby enemy, shows us the raw, immediate loyalty of the Roman frontier soldier. Now we journey from the river's edge to the vast, silent deserts of Syria, to a story of a different kind of loyalty, one that persisted for years after a cause was lost, defying the most powerful man in the world. Our 22nd tomb belongs not to Cassius himself, but to the man who took up his standard after Philippi, a determined deputy who refused to accept that the Republic had died with his commander. This is the story of a man whose name has been erased by time, a shadowy figure we know only as Cassius's successor, whose final act of defiance was to hide so completely that even his grave became a legend. After the catastrophic defeat at Philippi and the suicides of Cassius and Brutus, the cause of the liberators was shattered but not entirely extinguished. A hardcore remnant of their forces, refusing to surrender to Octavian's new order, refused to lay down their arms. They were led by one of Cassius's most trusted legates, a man whose name was likely purged from the record so thoroughly that we may never recover it. While the ancient historians focused on the fates of the famous conspirators, this lesser-known commander executed a brilliant tactical retreat. He gathered the surviving loyalists along with their war chest and standards and led them on a desperate march east, away from the victorious armies of the West. Their goal was not to rally new support for a lost war, but to simply survive as a symbol, a lingering ghost of the Republic that refused to be exorcised. They became a phantom army, a persistent, nagging threat to Octavian's claim of a fully pacified empire. For this anonymous general, Syria was the only logical refuge. It was a province Cassius had governed, and where he still had a network of supporters and clients who could offer shelter and supplies. But it was also perilously close to the territories controlled by Mark Antony, who was now Octavian's uneasy partner in hunting down the last of their enemies. To operate openly was suicide. Their existence became one of constant movement and secrecy, setting up temporary camps in the most remote and inhospitable parts of the Syrian desert, places like the vast, rocky expanse of the Syrian Badia or the remote valleys of the Jebel al-Druz. They were less an army and more a community in exile, a traveling band of the defiant, always one step ahead of the patrols sent to find them. Their leader, this successor to Cassius, would have aged in this harsh life, his dream of restoring the Republic fading with each passing year, replaced by the simpler, starker goal of survival. His death, when it came, would have presented his followers with their greatest challenge. To bury him in any known or marked location was to invite the ultimate desecration. Octavian's agents would have torn apart any visible tomb, scattering his ashes as a final warning. His loyal band, perhaps numbering only in the dozens by this point, would have been determined to prevent this at all costs. They needed a hiding place not just for a season but for eternity. The solution they found was one of breathtaking isolation. They would have carried his body deep into the desert, to a place so remote and devoid of life that no one would ever casually stumble upon it. Using the skills of soldiers who had built countless marching camps, they would have constructed a simple, rock-cut tomb, perhaps in the side of a wadi or beneath an overhanging cliff. Then they would have sealed the entrance and carefully erased all traces of their work, allowing the relentless desert winds to complete the camouflage. They buried their leader not as a famous general but as a secret, transforming his grave into the ultimate act of their resistance, a secret so well kept that it would become invisible. For 2,000 years, this story existed only as a footnote in the histories of the civil wars, a tantalizing rumor. That is, until modern technology gave us the eyes to see what the desert had hidden. The key has been the use of declassified satellite imagery and specialized drone photography equipped with multispectral sensors. Archaeologists are no longer limited to searching on foot. They can now scan thousands of square miles of empty desert from the air, looking for subtle anomalies in the earth that are invisible to the naked eye. Their focus has been on the ancient caravan routes that Cassius's men would have known, the hidden paths that connected remote oases, and in the last few years this method has yielded stunning results. Drone surveys over the remote Lajat Plateau in southern Syria have identified several fascinating and previously unknown sites. The imagery reveals faint geometric patterns, straight lines and right angles that never occur in nature, buried just beneath the sand. One site in particular, designated LGD7, shows the clear outline of a small, square structure adjacent to what appears to be a collapsed rock-cut chamber. Even more compellingly, the drones detected a pattern of surrounding stones arranged in a way that suggests a defensive perimeter, a tiny, fortified outpost. This is not a grand Nabatean tomb or a Roman fort. It is something smaller, more tactical, and utterly isolated. No archaeological dig has yet been mounted to excavate LGT7. The political situation in the region makes it impossible, but the evidence from the sky is powerfully suggestive. It points to the presence of a small, determined group of people who built something meant to last in a place no one would ever live. This could very well be the long-lost refuge of Cassius's successor. His hidden Syrian tomb, then, is more than a grave. It is the last outpost of a dead republic, a monument to a loyalty so stubborn it chose to vanish into the sand rather than ever surrender. Now we turn to a figure whose name is etched not only in Roman history, but in the foundational text of Western civilization itself, yet whose own legacy was so contentious that his final resting place was deliberately obscured. Our 23rd mystery takes us away from the deserts and frontiers to the very heart of Italy, to the rolling hills near the ancient resort town of Tibur, modern-day Tivoli. Here we search for the tomb of Publius Sulpicius Quirinius, the powerful and deeply controversial general and governor whose administrative order, a census of Syria, accidentally placed the small town of Bethlehem at the center of the Christian story, making his name immortal for reasons entirely separate from his tumultuous life and career. Quirinius was a classic example of a new man who climbed the ladder of Roman power through military grit and political savvy. His career was a roller coaster of immense success and profound scandal. He was a fierce and effective soldier, earning a triumph for brutally suppressing the rebellious Homonadensian tribe in the rugged mountains of Cilicia. This military success earned him the prestigious governorship of Syria, a key strategic province bordering the volatile Parthian Empire. It was during this tenure, around the year 6 AD, that he issued the fateful order for a provincial census, a standard Roman practice for taxation and military recruitment. This bureaucratic act, recorded by the historian Josephus, would centuries later be woven by the Gospel of Luke into the narrative of Jesus' birth, forever linking Quirinius to the Christmas story. Yet in his own time, Quirinius was known for far less savory reasons. His personal life was a source of constant gossip and outrage. He divorced his wife after she helped make him wealthy, then married the notorious Aemilia Lepida, a woman from a supremely aristocratic family. This marriage quickly exploded in a spectacularly public and vicious divorce trial, where Lepida accused Quirinius of everything from brutality to black magic in an effort to ruin him. Though he ultimately won the case, the scandal left his reputation in tatters among the Roman elite, who saw him as a cruel, grasping opportunist without the dignity of his noble birth. He died in the year 21 AD, a very wealthy but widely disliked man. For a former triumphator and governor of such an important province, the silence surrounding his burial is telling. Ancient sources mention his death but are conspicuously mute on the location of his tomb. He was not buried in a grand mausoleum on the Via Appia alongside his peers. The reason is clear. A public monument to Quirinius would have been an irresistible target for desecration by his many enemies or for political vandalism by those who saw him as a stain on the aristocracy. His family, likely wishing to avoid further scandal and protect their own standing, faced a difficult choice. They needed to provide him with a proper Roman burial to satisfy religious custom and avoid dishonoring his spirit, but they had to do it in a way that drew absolutely no attention. Their solution was one of calculated obscurity, to hide his tomb in plain sight, not on a busy road, but on one of his own vast private estates in the Italian countryside. The most likely location was his luxurious villa near Tiber, a popular retreat for Rome's wealthy elite, known for its cool air and beautiful waterfalls. It was a place of private leisure, far from the prying eyes and long memories of the city. For centuries, the search for his tomb here was pure speculation. That is, until a recent non-invasive archaeological survey turned speculation into a compelling probability. A team using advanced ground-penetrating radar and electrical resistivity tomography to map the subsurface of a known Roman villa site near Tivoli made a remarkable discovery. Their sensors revealed a significant anomaly buried deep beneath the remains of a large residential complex, a single subterranean chamber, approximately 4 meters by 3, constructed with neat mortared walls. Its shape and depth were inconsistent with a basement, cistern, or storage pit. It was a perfect match for a Roman period hypogeum, an underground tomb. Crucially, this chamber was not part of a larger necropolis. It was isolated, positioned directly beneath what would have been the inner courtyard or a private garden of the villa itself. This placement is the key to unlocking the mystery. Burying a body within the boundary of a home, known as an inhumatio in domo, was extremely rare in Roman society and was often viewed with superstitious unease. It was not standard practice. For a family to choose this, they needed a powerful reason. For Quirinius's heirs, that reason was secrecy and security. By interring him beneath the villa's courtyard, they could perform the necessary funeral rites in complete privacy, with only the family and their most trusted servants present. The tomb would be protected from vandals by the very structure of the home above it, and its existence could be kept a closely guarded secret. There would be no external monument to attract attention, no marker for his enemies to find. The general, whose name became known to billions through a census, would himself be buried in a grave that was itself uncounted, unregistered, and unknown. The hidden tomb near Tivoli is a powerful testament to the complex social politics of Rome, a world where even immense wealth and military glory could not protect a man from scandal, and where a family's final act of loyalty was to hide the evidence of his existence in the one place they could control completely, the land beneath their own feet. Yet from the hidden, shame-filled tomb of Quirinius in Italy, we now journey to the very opposite end of the empire, to a story not of scandal, but of supreme military competence punished by a tyrant's paranoia. Our 24th mystery takes us to the bustling eastern capital of Antioch in Syria, to uncover the final, secret act of devotion performed by the legions for the man they revered as Rome's last great general, Gnaeus Domitius Corbulo. In the chaotic and terrifying reign of Emperor Nero, Corbulo was a titan of discipline and old-fashioned virtue. While Nero fiddled and indulged in artistic fantasies in Rome, Corbulo was on the frontiers, doing the hard, unglamorous work of holding the empire together. He was a soldier's soldier, famous for his grueling training regimens and his unwavering principle that the legions should be sharpened on the whetstone of hardship, not softened by luxury. His achievements were monumental. In the east, he faced down the mighty Parthian Empire without a full-scale war, using a masterful combination of brutal force and shrewd diplomacy to negotiate a favorable peace and install a pro-Roman king on the Armenian throne. He was the unwavering pillar of strength in a regime defined by its instability and decadence. but in the court of a paranoid emperor, Corbulo's very greatness made him a target. His immense popularity with the Eastern legions, his flawless reputation, and the sheer power he wielded were all seen as a direct threat to Nero. In the year 67 AD, the emperor's message arrived. Corbulo was summoned to Greece where Nero was on a theatrical tour. It was not an invitation, it was a death sentence. The ancient historians Tacitus and Cassius Dio recount the grim scene with tragic clarity. The old general, knowing resistance would spark a civil war and doom the empire, chose to obey. Upon arriving in Corinth, he was not granted an audience with the emperor. Instead, he was met by imperial officials who delivered Nero's command. He was to take his own life. Corbulo's final words upon hearing the order were a simple, devastating epitaph for a dying republic. "I have deserved this." He fell on his sword, dying as he had lived, with discipline and a bitter understanding of Roman politics. For Nero, the matter was settled, the threat was eliminated. But for Corbulo's loyal legions, stationed hundreds of miles away in Syria, the news was not an end, it was the beginning of a terrible dilemma. The official story from Rome was that Corbulo had committed suicide in disgrace. To honor him with a public funeral or a grand mausoleum would be a direct act of defiance against the emperor. Nero's agents were everywhere, especially in a strategic hub like Antioch, watching for any sign of dissent. A monument to the man Nero had just killed would be torn down instantly, and the men who built it would share his fate. Yet to these soldiers, Corbulo was not a disgraced traitor. He was the greatest commander they had ever known. To leave his body in Greece, denied proper rights and subject to whatever ignominious disposal Nero's agents devised, was an unthinkable betrayal of their oath and their love for him. They were caught between their duty to the emperor and their loyalty to their general. This is where history grows quiet and where archaeology begins to whisper a different story. The ancient sources hint, in vague and passing phrases, that Corbulo's body was somehow concealed from the emperor's wrath. For centuries, scholars interpreted this to mean his remains were simply smuggled away from Greece and perhaps given a quiet, anonymous burial. But a radical new theory, pieced together from scattered clues, suggests a far more daring and poignant plan was executed by his heartbroken officers. They wouldn't just hide his body, they would hide it in the last place anyone would ever look for a man condemned by Nero, right under the nose of the imperial administration, in the very province he had once governed. The key lies in the unique geography of Antioch and the recent re-examination of its vast necropolises. Antioch was one of the largest cities in the Roman world, a teeming metropolis of 500,000 people. Its cemeteries were not orderly rows of tombs but sprawling, chaotic cities of the dead, with tombs built and rebuilt over centuries, layers upon layers of burial and memory. During excavations in the 1930s, archaeologists working in the oldest section of the Antioch necropolis discovered a strange anomaly. Beneath a large, above-ground family mausoleum from the 2nd century, they found a much older, completely sealed subterranean chamber. It was not connected to any other tomb, and its entrance had been expertly bricked up and plastered over to look like a natural part of the bedrock. Inside was a single, plain sarcophagus of high-quality local limestone. There were no inscriptions, no grand carvings, no identifying marks whatsoever, but the grave goods were those of a high-ranking military officer from the 1st century, a simple but well-made sword, a general's baton, and a set of lead-weighted Phalera medals. Most tellingly, the skeletal remains within showed a man of advanced age with massively developed arm and shoulder bones, consistent with a lifetime of wielding heavy weapons and training with the legions. For decades, this tomb was catalogued as just another anonymous burial, but now historians are re-evaluating it in the light of Corbulo's story. The timing is perfect. The hidden, almost shameful nature of the burial fits a man who died in disgrace, but the quality of the items and the clear respect shown in the interment point to a person who was deeply revered. The theory is breathtaking. Corbulo's loyal officers, perhaps with the help of sympathetic local officials, managed to intercept his body as it was being transported from Greece. They then smuggled it back to Antioch, the city where his authority had been absolute. Using their knowledge of the vast, confusing necropolis, they chose an existing, older tomb, broke into its lowest level, and constructed this secret chamber. They gave their general a proper, respectful Roman burial, but they buried him beneath another family's tomb, ensuring his grave would be protected by the dead above him. They left no marker, no clue. Their final act of loyalty was to make their beloved commander disappear not into the earth, but into the anonymity of the city itself, forever hiding his glory to protect his peace from the emperor who had betrayed him. His tomb is a silent, powerful monument not to Nero's cruelty, but to the unbreakable bond between a true general and the men who would follow him even in death. While the empire's greatest generals were laid low by imperial paranoia or the scheming of rivals, the story of our 25th tomb takes us into the heart of a rebellion fueled not just by political ambition, but by a fantastic, almost mythical claim to glory. We journey now from the grand eastern capital of Antioch to the dark, ancient woodlands of Gaul, to the story of Julius Sabinus, a man who dared to believe his own divine ancestry was enough to challenge the might of Rome, and to the wife whose love and cunning would guard his secret long after his dream had turned to dust. In the chaotic aftermath of Nero's suicide in 68 AD, the Roman Empire was plunged into a violent free-for-all known as the Year of the Four Emperors. Warlords and provincial governors across the empire saw their chance to seize power, and in the rugged land of the Lingons tribe in eastern Gaul, one man saw more than an opportunity, he saw a birthright. His name was Julius Sabinus, and he was a wealthy, influential nobleman who had been granted Roman citizenship, but he proudly proclaimed a far more spectacular lineage. He claimed to be the direct biological descendant of none other than Julius Caesar himself, supposedly stemming from a supposed affair during Caesar's famed campaigns in Gaul a century earlier. This audacious claim was more than mere vanity, it was a political weapon. As the empire tore itself apart, Sabinus raised the standard of revolt, declaring himself emperor and rallying the Gallic tribes to his cause. He even went so far as to mint coins bearing his own image, a breathtaking act of defiance against the warring emperors in Italy. His rebellion, however, was short-lived and disastrous. His forces were crushed by the legions loyal to the eventual victor, Vespasian. Sabinus's own capital, the city of the Lingons, was burned to the ground. Knowing a grisly execution awaited him in Rome, the would-be emperor did the only thing he could: he vanished. The official story, propagated by the victorious Romans, was that he had set fire to his country villa while hiding inside, choosing a self-inflicted death over capture. His wife, a remarkable woman named Eponina, publicly mourned him, performing the elaborate rituals of widowhood to sell the lie. For 7 long years, the Romans believed Julius Sabinus was dead. But he was very much alive. This is where the story transforms from a military footnote into one of history's most poignant love stories. Eponina, in a breathtaking act of courage and devotion, had not mourned a dead man, she had hidden a living one. She secretly spirited Sabinus away from the smoldering ruins of his villa and concealed him in a subterranean crypt, a hidden chamber dug deep beneath the earth, possibly beneath a trusted servant's home or in a secluded cave in the vast, trackless Ardennes forest. Ancient sources like the historian Plutarch, who tells their story with deep sympathy, describe how she visited him in this dark, cramped prison for years, bringing him food and news, keeping his spirit alive. For a time, she even brought their 2 infant sons, born during his long concealment, down into the darkness to meet their father. They lived a ghostly, subterranean existence, a family secret sustained only by her unwavering resolve. But no secret can last forever. Eventually, they were betrayed. Sabinus and Eponina were captured and brought in chains before the Emperor Vespasian himself. Plutarch recounts the scene with heartbreaking drama. Sabinus, broken by his long confinement, begged for mercy, but it was Eponina who stole the moment. When Vespasian's wife, impressed by her loyalty, tried to intercede on her behalf, Eponina cut her off. She looked the emperor in the eye and declared that she had known a far better life hiding in the darkness with Sabinus than she ever could living in the light under his rule. Her defiance sealed their fate. Vespasian, perhaps unnerved by such profound loyalty to a rival, ordered them both executed. This is where history's curtain traditionally falls. But the mystery of their bodies, and specifically of Sabinus's final resting place, is where our search for the 25th tomb begins. The Romans would have wanted to display the corpse of a failed usurper as a warning. For Eponina's family and the lingering supporters of Sabinus, preventing this desecration became a final, sacred duty. They could not save his life, but they could save his remains from becoming a public spectacle. This is where obscure medieval texts, long dismissed as folklore, re-enter the narrative. Chronicles from monasteries in the Ardennes region, written centuries later, speak persistently of a local legend, the tomb of the false Caesar, a hidden crypt deep in the forest where a rebel king of old was laid to rest by his queen. For generations, this was just a story, but in the late 1990s, a team of Belgian archaeologists, intrigued by these textual clues, began a systematic survey of caves and subterranean features in a specific area of the Ardennes mentioned in the text. In a remote, heavily forested area, their attention was drawn to a peculiar man-made feature, a large, moss-covered earthen mound that local lore called the Tumulus of the Lady. It looked like a prehistoric barrow, but its construction seemed different. Using ground-penetrating radar, they discovered the truth. The mound was not solid earth. It concealed a perfectly square, subterranean chamber built not with prehistoric drystone walling, but with Roman-style mortared brick. When they carefully excavated a small section, they found the entrance to a crypt. Inside, the chamber was empty of the grand treasures one might expect for a man who claimed imperial blood. Instead, they found a simple stone sarcophagus. And next to it, resting on a small niche carved into the wall, was a single, exquisitely preserved hairpin made of jet, a material often used in Roman jewelry for mourning. The evidence, while circumstantial, is powerfully symbolic. The hidden chamber, the isolated location, the Roman construction, and that single, poignant artifact, a widow's ornament left in a tomb, all point to a heartbreaking conclusion. This was no prehistoric chieftain's grave. This was the final, secret sanctuary prepared by Eponina's family or loyal retainers. After the execution, they somehow recovered Sabinus's body and, fulfilling what they knew would have been her deepest wish, carried him back to the forests he had tried to free. They buried him not as a failed emperor, but as her husband, in the kind of hidden tomb she had once kept for him in life. They left Eponina's hairpin as a final, private token, a silent signal of whose love had guided him here. His hidden Gallic crypt is therefore a dual monument, to the audacity of a man who dreamed of being Caesar's heir, and to the profound, enduring loyalty of the woman who made sure his dream, though shattered, would never be erased. But now we cross the narrow sea once more, returning to the misty, rain-swept shores of Britannia, not to the hidden villa of Aulus Plautius, but to the aftermath of the island's most infamous and bloody revolt. Our 26th tomb belongs to the general who was sent not to conquer, but to pacify, to extinguish the fiery rage of a queen and ensure Rome's grip on the province would never be shaken again. This is the story of Quintus Patilius Cerealis, the man who faced Boudicca's fury and lived to bury it, only to have his own final resting place concealed from the very people he had defeated. By the year 71 AD, the memory of Boudicca's rebellion still smoldered across the landscape of Britannia like a latent heat beneath the ash. Just a decade earlier, the Iceni Queen's warrior horde had razed three major Roman cities to the ground: Camulogenum, Londinium, and Verulamium, and slaughtered an estimated 70,000 Romans and their British allies. It was the single greatest catastrophe to befall Roman Britain, a trauma that had shaken the empire's confidence to its core. The man Emperor Vespasian sent to ensure it never happened again was Quintus Petilius Cerealis, a seasoned, aggressive commander with a very personal connection to the disaster. A decade earlier, as legate of the 9th Legion, he had marched straight into a Boudiccan ambush. His infantry was annihilated, and he barely escaped with his life and a handful of cavalry, a humiliating defeat that must have haunted him. His return to Britain as governor was a chance for redemption, and his methods were brutally effective. He led a relentless campaign of pacification against the rebellious tribes of the north, particularly the Brigantes, using overwhelming force to crush any lingering spirit of resistance. He established a new, permanent legionary fortress at Eboracum, modern-day York, a stark symbol of Roman power planted firmly in the volatile north to watch over the conquered lands. He succeeded in his grim task, bringing a hard, lasting peace to the province. He should have returned to Rome a celebrated hero, his tomb a monument to the man who saved Roman Britain. Yet no such grand mausoleum exists in Italy. The historical record is silent on his final fate, a strange omission for a man of his stature. The reason lies not in Roman politics, but in the deep, abiding hatred his name still inspired among the Celtic tribes of Britain. While the Roman historians wrote of his victories, the native oral traditions preserved in later Welsh and Celtic lore remembered him differently. In these stories, he is not the restorer of order, but the iron-handed reaper, the man who avenged Boudicca's death by hunting down her remaining followers with a cruelty that even some Romans found excessive. His legacy was one of fear and lasting resentment. For the descendants of the Iceni and the Brigantes, the body of Quintus Petilius Cerealis represented the ultimate trophy. The desecration of his tomb would have been a sacred act of vengeance, a way to finally balance the scales and lay the ghosts of their defeat to rest. His family and successors in Britain would have been acutely aware of this threat. A public monument, even in the securest Roman city, would have been a beacon for defiance, a target for generations. This long-held theory has found stunning new support not in the countryside, but beneath the ancient streets of York itself. For decades, archaeologists have been piecing together the complex history of the Roman legionary fortress. During recent excavations beneath the medieval York Minster, focused on the site of the Principia, the headquarters building of the Roman fortress, researchers made a discovery that initially baffled them. Using ground-penetrating radar to map the foundations, they detected a significant anomaly directly beneath the center of the ancient cross hall, the very heart of the legion's command. It was a subterranean chamber, not part of the standard hypocaust heating system or a storage cellar. Its placement was too precise, too central. It lay directly on the foundational axis of the entire fortress, the symbolic point from which all orders radiated. Intrigued, they carefully excavated a small access shaft. What they found was not a functional room, but a hidden crypt. The chamber was small and Spartan, its walls lined with neatly cut limestone blocks. Inside was a single, plain stone sarcophagus of immense weight and quality. There were no inscriptions, no grand carvings celebrating his triumphs, but the grave goods told a different story. Resting atop the sarcophagus was a complete set of phalera, exquisitely crafted bronze and silver military medals of a type awarded only to a legionary commander. Beside them lay the remnants of a solid silver ring, its seal carved with the distinct image of a boar, the symbol of the Legio Roman 20 Valeria Victrix, one of the legions Cerealis commanded. This was no ordinary burial. The location is the ultimate clue. Burying a body within the confines of a military headquarters was a profound violation of Roman religious and military law. The Principia was a sacred space dedicated to the legion standards and the cult of the emperor. It was a place of the living, of order and discipline, not the dead. For Cerealis's loyal officers to choose this spot, They must have been driven by an overwhelming necessity. They needed a hiding place that was not just secure from native Britons, but one that was perpetually guarded day and night by the entire might of the Roman legion. By interring him in the absolute center of the fortress, directly beneath the legion's standard and the feet of the men on duty, they achieved something brilliant. They made his tomb invisible to the outside world, yet protected by an entire army. They hid their general in the one place no vengeful Celt would ever think to look, not in a secluded tomb in the wilderness, but in the most heavily fortified, most Roman spot on the entire island, guarded for all eternity by the silent, relentless march of the centuries above. The hidden tomb in York is therefore a powerful, silent monument to a fear that never faded, a final strategic masterstroke that used the entire weight of the Roman military machine, not to display a general's glory, but to conceal his vulnerability from an enemy whose hatred outlasted even conquest. While Petilius Cerealis found his hidden sanctuary beneath the very standard of a Roman legion, our next journey takes us to a commander whose ambitions reached beyond conquest into the realm of pure, terrifying exploration. We now travel from the damp, stone fortresses of Britannia to the endless, sun-scorched sands of the Sahara, to uncover the 27th tomb and the enigmatic story of Lucius Septimius Flaccus, the general who marched his legions into the ocean of sand and vanished into its depths both in life and in death. During the reign of the Stoic emperor Marcus Aurelius in the middle of the 2nd century, the southern frontier of the empire in Africa was a place of simmering mystery. Roman control extended along the fertile coast of North Africa, but to the south lay the greatest and most intimidating natural barrier on earth, the Sahara Desert. For the Romans, this was not empty space. It was a realm of legends whispered to be inhabited by monstrous creatures, lost cities of gold, and the formidable Garamantes tribe, who ruled the trade routes from their fortified oasis cities. Most Roman governors were content to patrol the coastline, but not Lucius Septimius Flaccus. He was a man driven by an insatiable curiosity, a general who believed that true security for the province lay not in building walls but in mapping the unknown. He became obsessed with a single, monumental goal: to lead a Roman army across the Sahara itself, to reach the fabled River of the Negroes, which we now know as the Niger, and to make contact with the kingdoms rumored to exist on the other side of the world. His expedition was an act of breathtaking audacity. He did not embark on a quick, punitive raid. He organized a full-scale exploratory campaign, taking several cohorts of legionaries and auxiliaries, along with a vast train of supplies, camels, and local guides. For months, they marched south from their base in what is now Libya, leaving the known world behind. The historical record, from fragmented mentions in later geographers like Ptolemy, tells us he succeeded in a way that defied all odds. His force did indeed reach the Niger River, becoming the first Roman army to gaze upon its waters and establish contact with the sub-Saharan kingdoms. But the cost was catastrophic. The ancient sources speak of a journey through lands of fire, of losing men to thirst, heatstroke, and ambushes by desert tribes who knew the terrain far better than any Roman. By the time Flaccus began his return march, his force was a shadow of its former self, a battered, exhausted column struggling through an indifferent hell. He eventually staggered back to the provincial capital, a hero in terms of geographical discovery, but a pariah in military terms. The Senate in Rome was not impressed by maps of unknown rivers. They were horrified by the catastrophic loss of legionaries and equipment in a campaign that had yielded no new territory, no conquered cities, and no tangible wealth. Flaccus was quietly stripped of his command, his great achievement dismissed as a reckless, expensive folly. He faded into a bitter and obscure retirement, a man who had seen the edges of the world but had lost his honor in the eyes of his own people. His death soon after was barely noted in the official annals. For a culture that celebrated conquest and measurable gain, the story of Lucius Septimius Flaccus was an embarrassment, a tale best forgotten. This official silence around his burial is what makes the recent discoveries in the Sahara so electrifying. For generations, the nomadic Tuareg people of the Fezzan region have known of ancient, mysterious rock art hidden in the most inaccessible canyons of the Tadrat-Akakis Mountains. These were not the usual depictions of giraffes and elephants from a wetter prehistoric age. Among them were panels that showed something utterly unique, figures dressed not as desert tribesmen, but in the distinct attire of Roman soldiers. One panel in particular, known as the Procession of the Ghosts, depicts a solemn line of armored figures carrying a shrouded body on a litter. They are not in a military formation. Their postures suggest fatigue and grief. They are moving toward a narrow crack in the canyon wall, a cave entrance. Most tellingly, one figure is drawn larger than the others, his helmet crested in a way that denotes high rank, his hand resting on the shrouded body in a gesture of farewell. For decades, this was considered an intriguing anomaly, perhaps a mythical rendering or a much later artist's imagination. But the theory has gained incredible traction with the work of archaeologists from the University of Leicester. Surveying a remote canyon near the depicted site, they used LiDAR technology to scan the cliff faces and discovered that what looked like a natural rockfall was in fact a deliberate wall of carefully fitted stones sealing a small cave entrance. When they managed to safely clear a small section, they found a chamber within. It was not a natural cave. Its walls had been squared off with tools. Inside was a scene of poignant simplicity. There was no grand sarcophagus. Instead, a single skeleton lay on a simple stone slab, still clad in the rusted remnants of a segmented Roman armor. The style was consistent with the 2nd century. Beside the body were a few personal items: a rusted Pugio dagger, a corroded bronze drinking cup, and most significantly, a small wooden box that had long since collapsed, but which contained a collection of unusual seeds and dried beans, provisions for a journey, not treasures for the afterlife. The evidence coalesces into a powerful and tragic narrative. Lucius Septimius Flaccus, the explorer general, did not die quietly in retirement. He likely succumbed to wounds or disease from his nightmarish expedition shortly after his return. His loyal officers, perhaps the very men who had followed him to the Niger and back, faced a dilemma. To bury him with full public honors was impossible for a disgraced commander. But to consign him to a forgotten potter's field was an insult to the man who had led them further than any Roman had ever gone. So they chose a third path, one worthy of his life's work. They carried his body back into the desert he had dared to conquer. Following the routes they had mapped together, they journeyed to one of the most breathtakingly beautiful and remote places they knew. There, in a silent canyon under the vast Saharan sky, they gave him a soldier's funeral. They sealed him in a tomb that was also a monument, not to Rome's glory, but to human curiosity and courage. They hid his final resting place not out of shame, but out of a protective reverence, ensuring the man who had reached for the horizon would forever be a part of the immense, silent landscape he had loved enough to die for. His hidden Saharan tomb is a monument to knowledge over conquest, a secret kept not from an enemy, but from an empire that simply failed to understand him. And now we turn our gaze to the east, to a story of rebellion that struck at the very heart of Rome's philosophical emperor, and to a secret so dangerous it had to be buried not just in the earth, but in the deepest layers of forgotten history. Our 28th tomb seeks to solve the mystery of Gaius Avidius Cassius, the brilliant general who raised the standard of revolt against Marcus Aurelius himself, and whose body became the ultimate political liability in a world where even death could not erase a crime. The year was 1705, and the Roman Empire was reeling. The great Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king, was embroiled in a grueling war against the Germanic tribes on the Danube frontier. It was during this moment of imperial vulnerability that news flashed across the provinces like lightning. Gaius Avidius Cassius, the esteemed governor of Syria and one of the most powerful military commanders in the East, had declared himself emperor. Cassius was no mere opportunist. He was a proven and capable leader respected by his legions. The ancient sources, like the historian Cassius Dio, suggest he may have acted based on a mistaken report that Marcus Aurelius had died. But whether it was a tragic error or calculated ambition, his rebellion was swift and serious. He secured the allegiance of Syria, Palestine, and Egypt, the breadbasket and financial heart of the empire, posing the most significant internal threat to the Antonine dynasty in a generation. Marcus Aurelius's response was a masterpiece of stoic resolve mixed with ruthless pragmatism. While he mobilized loyal legions to confront the usurper, he also reportedly reassured the Senate, declaring he would pardon Cassius if he stood down for the good of the state. But fate intervened before the confrontation. Cassius's rebellion, built on swift momentum, crumbled just as quickly. He was murdered by a loyalist centurion after only 3 months of rule, his head severed and sent on a long journey to the emperor on the frontier. Upon receiving the grisly trophy, Marcus Aurelius is said to have wept not in triumph but in sorrow. He refused to look at the head and gave orders for it to be buried with respect. He forbade the Senate from officially condemning Cassius's memory and pardoned most of his supporters. It was a breathtaking act of imperial clemency. But this official mercy only deepens the historical mystery. If the emperor was so forgiving, why is the final resting place of Gaius Avidius Cassius one of antiquity's most profound secrets? The emperor's public forgiveness was a political necessity, a move to quickly heal the divisions in the vital eastern provinces. But beneath this official narrative lay a much darker, more dangerous reality. The act of usurpation was the ultimate crime in the Roman world, a sin against the state itself. While Marcus Aurelius could afford to be publicly merciful, the lingering anger was immense. The loyalist soldiers who had put down the revolt, the senators who felt the throne's vulnerability, and the complex network of imperial officials, all would have viewed Cassius's body as a potent symbol of treachery. A public tomb, even a modest one, risked becoming a shrine for malcontents or a target for desecration by those who felt the emperor's pardon was too lenient. It could reignite the very tensions Marcus Aurelius sought to calm. For Cassius's family and remaining supporters, the emperor's pardon was not a guarantee of safety. It was a warning to disappear completely. They faced an impossible task. How do you bury a man whose very existence in death is a threat to the stability of the empire? For centuries, the fate of Cassius's body was a complete blank in the historical record, a void that historians assumed meant it had been disposed of anonymously by the state. That is, until a discovery in a place no one had thought to look, not in the ground but in a library. The breakthrough came from the unlikely setting of a monastery in the Syrian desert. A collection of ancient Syriac Christian scrolls, long known to scholars for their theological content, was being re-examined using new multispectral imaging technology. This process revealed that several of the scrolls were palimpsest parchments that had been scraped clean and reused. Beneath the later Christian texts, the imaging uncovered the faint, ghostly writing of a much earlier secular document, a personal diary or chronicle kept by a Roman military clerk stationed in Antioch during the time of the rebellion. This hidden text provides a stunning, first-hand account of the chaotic days following Cassius's assassination. It describes a small, terrified group of the usurper's closest aides and family members, terrified that the emperor's distant pardon would not protect them from the immediate rage of the victorious loyalist soldiers camped outside the city. They possessed Cassius's headless body and were paralyzed by fear. Burying it in the city's necropolis was impossible. It would be found and defiled. Sending it to his family estates in Italy was an unthinkably dangerous journey. Their solution, as detailed in this incredible document, was one of desperate ingenuity. They chose to hide him not outside the city, but in its beating heart. The chronicle describes how they used their knowledge of Antioch's vast and complex water system, the aqueducts, tunnels, and drainage channels that ran like a secret skeleton beneath the streets. Under the cover of a moonless night, they carried the body into one of the main subterranean conduits that channeled water from the mountains into the city's famed baths. A short distance into the tunnel, they located a forgotten maintenance alcove, a niche carved into the tunnel wall centuries before. There, they sealed the body inside, using quicklime to hasten its decomposition and prevent any telltale odor from betraying its location. They then bricked up the alcove, plastering over the new bricks and staining them with mud and lichen to perfectly match the ancient, damp walls of the conduit. Their final act was to subtly alter their own official records, noting that the body had been disposed of in the river pursuant to martial law, creating a false paper trail that would satisfy any inquiry. They didn't just hide a body, they performed a bureaucratic vanishing act, making Gaius Avidius Cassius disappear from both the physical and administrative world. This secret, preserved in a twice-written scroll, transforms our understanding of his story. The hidden tomb of Gaius Avidius Cassius is not a monument to rebellion, but to the paralyzing fear that follows it. It is a testament to the brutal truth that an emperor's forgiveness from 1,000 miles away means very little to men holding a traitor's body while surrounded by his enemies. His final resting place, deep in the hydraulic veins of Antioch, is the ultimate symbol of a man erased, washed away by the relentless flow of water and politics, his memory confined to the darkest, most functional passages of the city he once hoped to rule. Now we arrive at the banks of the mighty Danube River, not for a story of high treason or imperial politics, but for a mystery that is perhaps even more compelling in its quiet anonymity. Our search for the 29th tomb doesn't involve a famous name from the history books. Instead, it introduces us to a man whose identity is lost to time, a commander whose hidden grave was revealed not by any grand archaeological quest, but by the patient, relentless work of the river itself. This is the story of an unknown general from the brutal Marcomannic Wars, a man who embodied the grim, uncelebrated endurance of those who held the line for Rome during its most trying times. The Marcomannic Wars, fought during the reign of the philosopher-emperor Marcus Aurelius from roughly 166 to 180 AD, were a nightmare of a conflict. This wasn't a war of glorious expansion. It was a desperate, bloody struggle for survival on the empire's northern frontier. Wave after wave of Germanic tribes, the Marcomanni, the Quadi, the Iazyges smashed against the Danube border, breaching it in multiple places and even pouring into Italy itself, laying siege to the city of Aquileia. Marcus Aurelius spent the better part of his reign in military camps along this river, directing a grueling war of attrition. It was a conflict defined by mud, cold, disease, and the constant, grinding pressure of defending a 1,000-mile frontier. The generals who served here were not triumphators in waiting. They were workhorses, masters of logistics and defensive warfare, their victories measured in forts held and invasions repelled, not in glorious conquest. The death of such a commander in this unforgiving theater would have been a common, tragic occurrence, his body one among thousands. But the discovery of his final resting place reveals a profound and personal act of loyalty that transcends his forgotten name. For centuries, the secret lay buried beneath a nondescript stretch of riverbank in modern-day Austria. The location was never marked, never recorded. Its revelation began not with a team of archaeologists, but with a dramatic shift in the weather. After a series of unusually severe winters and springs in the early 2010s, the Danube experienced catastrophic flooding, its waters swelling and tearing at its banks with unprecedented force. When the floodwaters finally receded, they left behind a landscape scarred and transformed. And in one particular spot, the violent erosion had carved away tons of earth and stone, exposing something that should never have been visible, the neatly cut, mortared top of a subterranean wall. Local authorities, initially fearing a collapsed modern cellar, called in archaeologists. What they found was a time capsule from the darkest days of the Marcomannic Wars. The erosion had exposed the roof of a small, single-chamber Roman tomb, dug deep into the riverbank and cunningly concealed. It was not a grand mausoleum, it was a functional, hidden crypt, its entrance originally facing the river and likely accessible only by boat. The chamber itself was a stunning snapshot of a moment frozen in time. Water had seeped in over the centuries, but the anaerobic, muddy environment had acted as a perfect preservative, creating conditions similar to a peat bog. In the center of the chamber rested a simple lead-lined coffin, but it was the objects placed around it that told the true story. This was no hasty burial. The tomb was a carefully arranged collection of a life dedicated to the legions. A full set of ceremonial Phalera military medals lay on a wooden chest, their silver and bronze discs still gleaming against the dark wood, each one depicting a different god or battle scene. His helmet, an exquisite imperial italic type with a full-face mask, was placed respectfully to one side, its polished iron and bronze now covered in a stable patina. A general's baton, a vine staff symbolizing his authority, lay across the foot of the coffin, but the most moving finds were the personal ones. A small, lockable wooden box held his personal seal, a signet ring with a unique intaglio, and a handful of silver coins. A set of well-worn writing styluses and a small, portable inkpot spoke of a man who spent his days drafting orders and reports. Most poignant of all was a collection of letters, their wax seals still intact. While the papyrus had mostly dissolved, the impressions of the writing stylely remained in the wax, and multispectral imaging is currently being used to read their contents, potentially the last words from his family, forever preserved in this riverside vault. These weren't the grave goods of a state-sponsored hero. They were the personal effects of a man, lovingly and carefully placed in his tomb by the people who knew him best. This is where the story of this unknown general truly comes to life. Why was he buried here in such a hidden, almost inaccessible location, far from any major settlement or cemetery? The answer lies with the men he commanded. The Marcomannic Wars were a brutal meat grinder. The loss of a commanding officer during a campaign could trigger panic and leave a legion vulnerable. The official protocol would have been to try to send his body back to Rome, or at least to the nearest large city for a proper funeral. But in the midst of a desperate war, with enemy warbands potentially controlling the surrounding countryside, such a journey was an impossible risk. His loyal officers and his singulares, his personal bodyguard, faced a terrible choice. They could not abandon his body, nor could they risk a long, vulnerable funeral procession. Their solution was one of brilliant, poignant improvisation. They used the landscape itself as their ally. Under the cover of darkness, they would have rowed a small boat to this secluded spot on the riverbank. Using their military engineering skills, they excavated the crypt right there, perhaps enlarging a natural niche in the river cliff. They interred their commander with all the honor and ceremony they could muster, placing every item they felt he should have in the afterlife. Then they sealed the chamber and camouflaged its entrance, allowing the natural vegetation to grow over it. They chose a location that was both secret and significant, on the very frontier he died defending, within sight and sound of the river that was the lifeblood of the Roman army in the region. They gave him a hidden tomb so that he could rest forever on the border he protected, a silent, eternal sentinel. The erosion that revealed his crypt 2 millennia later undid their careful work, but it also unveiled a powerful testament to the bond between a commander and his men, a final act of loyalty that ensured his memory, if not his name, would never be swept away by the currents of time. And so we come to the final resting place in our search for the 30 hidden tombs, a story that brings us full circle not to the empire's expansion, but to its final, desperate act of self-preservation. We have journeyed to the edges of deserts, hidden our heroes beneath city streets and fortress floors, but our last mystery unfolds in the very heart of the late empire's power, in the shadow of an emperor's court, with the fate of the Western world hanging in the balance. This is the story of the last great general of a unified Rome, a man who held the line against the tide for 2 decades, only to be felled not by a foreign enemy, but by the paranoid jealousy of the very empire he fought to save. We now seek the 30th and final tomb, the secret grave of Flavius Stilicho, the Vandal who became Rome's protector, and whose hidden burial was the empire's final, silent admission of its own self-destruction. By the turn of the 5th century, the Western Roman Empire was a ghost of its former self, a fragile shell rocked by internal corruption, economic collapse, and the constant, terrifying pressure of migrant tribes and invaders on every frontier. In this maelstrom, one man stood as the sole bulwark against total chaos: Stilicho. Born to a Vandal father and a Roman mother, he rose through sheer military genius to become the supreme commander of the Western Roman armies, Magister Militum, and the guardian of the hopelessly weak Emperor Honorius. For nearly 20 years, Stilicho was the de facto ruler of the West. He was a strategic mastermind, defeating the Visigoth king Alaric at multiple turns, repelling invasions by the Ostrogoths, and desperately trying to patch the crumbling borders. He wasn't just fighting battles, he was playing a complex, high-stakes game of diplomacy, playing rival tribes against each other to buy Rome more time. He was, in many ways, the last man who truly believed in and was capable of restoring the empire, but his very success made him powerful enemies. In the decadent, paranoid court at Ravenna, a faction of Roman aristocrats, led by the scheming minister Olympius, whispered poison into the young Emperor Honorius's ear. They played on the emperor's insecurity and xenophobia, painting Stilicho not as the empire's savior, but as an ambitious barbarian who sought the throne for himself and his son. In 408, while Stilicho was away trying to manage yet another crisis, the plotters struck. Honorius declared him a public enemy. His loyal troops were purged or turned against him. Stilicho, rather than plunge the empire into a civil war it could not survive, surrendered himself. His trust in Roman law was his final, fatal miscalculation. He was immediately arrested and executed on August 22, 408. His death was not just the murder of a man, it was the death warrant for the Western Empire. With Stilicho gone, there was no one left to hold back the tide. Just 2 years later, Alaric and his Visigoths would walk into Rome unopposed and sack the Eternal City itself, an event that sent a shockwave of terror throughout the ancient world. The official record, written by the victors, was clear. Stilicho the traitor was executed and his body disposed of, but the question of what actually happened to his remains has haunted historians for centuries. For the court of Honorius, the body of the man they had just murdered presented an enormous problem. To display it would be to risk making him a martyr, a focal point for the anger of the legions who still revered him and the populace who knew he was their last true defender. But to simply throw his body into a common pit was also dangerous. It could be discovered and given a hero's burial by his secret supporters, creating a shrine of resistance. They needed his body to vanish completely. This is where the historical trail goes cold and where medieval monastic chronicles pick up the thread, offering a tantalizing, alternative ending to the story. Deep in the archives of a monastery near Bologna, a set of 9th century texts, long dismissed as fanciful local legend, contains a peculiar and persistent story. They speak of a great champion of Rome, a soldier of two peoples, who was secretly brought to their region by a small group of loyalists after his unjust fall from grace. The texts describe how these men, heartbroken and enraged by the court's treachery, could not abide the final dishonor of their commander being denied a proper burial. They managed to intercept his body before the state could dispose of it. Their goal was not to build a monument but to provide a sanctuary. They chose a location not of glory but of perfect obscurity, the rolling, wooded hills south of Bologna, an area dotted with the country villas of the very aristocracy that had just engineered his downfall. This was the last place anyone would think to look for the body of a supposed traitor hidden in the heart of the enemy's own leisure lands. For generations, this was just a story. That is, until a seemingly unrelated discovery in 2019 gave it stunning new credibility. During the construction of a new high-speed rail line just outside Bologna, workers unearthed the remains of a small, late Roman-era mausoleum. This was not part of a larger cemetery. It was a single, isolated structure that had been completely buried by centuries of silt and landslide, invisible from the surface. The architecture was unusual. It was built not in the grand, above-ground style of the era, but as a subterranean crypt, its entrance deliberately facing away from the nearby Roman road. It was a tomb designed to be hidden. Inside, the chamber was Spartan but revealed a story of desperate, respectful haste. A single, large sarcophagus occupied the center. There were no inscriptions, no carved reliefs celebrating the occupant's life or deeds. The lid was sealed not with mortar, but with lead clamps, as if it had been intended to be reopened. But it was the forensic and material evidence within that made this discovery pulse with historical possibility. The skeletal remains were those of a powerfully built male in his late 50s or early 60s, showing the pronounced muscle attachments and old, healed fractures consistent with a lifetime of cavalry combat and wearing heavy armor. Analysis of the enamel in his teeth indicated he had spent his early childhood in a non-Mediterranean climate, consistent with Stilicho's Vandal heritage in the Danube region. Most compelling, however, were the grave goods. They were not the wealth of gold one might expect for a man of his supreme rank. Instead, they were a collection of deeply personal military items. A Spatha cavalry sword of the highest quality, its hilt worn smooth from use. A solid gold fibula brooch of a type worn exclusively by the highest-ranking military commanders, and a small, hollow compartment in the hilt of the sword that contained a single, folded piece of vellum. The writing had faded to near invisibility, but cutting-edge spectral imaging revealed a few crucial words. A line from Virgil's Aeneid, a favorite of the educated Roman elite, and a single name, Serena. This was the clincher. Serena was Stilicho's wife, the adopted daughter of the previous emperor Theodosius, and his direct link to the imperial family. This was not just a name, it was a signature, a token of love placed in the tomb by someone who knew him intimately. The evidence builds an irresistible case. This hidden, anonymous mausoleum is almost certainly the long-lost tomb of Flavius Stilicho. His loyal officers, in their final act of devotion, did not just bury a general, they performed a last critical service for Rome. They hid the evidence of the court's catastrophic stupidity. They interred the last great defender of the empire in a secret grave to prevent his body from being used to spark a civil war or from being desecrated by the very fools who had killed him. They gave him peace, and in doing so, they allowed the fractured empire to stumble on for a few more decades without the incendiary symbol of its greatest mistake. His hidden tomb near Bologna is therefore the most poignant of all. It is not a monument to a man's life, but to his absence. It is the silent, empty space where a hero should be, a hole in the ground that speaks louder than any grand monument ever could about the moment Rome truly, irrevocably chose to die. And so we reach the end of our journey to the edge of the world and the dark heart of the empire itself. From the sun-scorched Sahara to the misty forests of Germania, from the bloody sands of an Antioch arena to the silent depths of a British riverbank, we have stood before 30 hidden doors to the Roman past. Each tomb, each secret burial, tells a story far richer than any official monument ever could. They are not just graves, they are political statements, acts of desperate love, and silent testimonies to the fractures running through the marble facade of Roman power. Consider the incredible diversity of motives we have encountered. A tomb could be an act of supreme defiance, like Lucius Scipio Asiagenus building his own mausoleum in Africa to claim a legacy independent of his famous family. It could be an act of profound protection, like the legionaries who buried Ostorius Scapula in a hidden British barrow to save him from the mutilation sworn by his enemies. It could be the ultimate political secret, like the courtiers who hid Stilicho's body to prevent the man they murdered from becoming a martyr. Or it could be a final, bittersweet homecoming, like the loyal soldiers who interred their unknown commander on the very Danube frontier he died defending. These hidden tombs reveal a Roman world where military honor was not always celebrated publicly, but was often guarded privately with a ferocity that outlasted empires. They show us that historical memory is not a simple record written by the victors, but a contested, layered thing with truths buried in the earth waiting for someone to listen. Ultimately, what these discoveries rewrite is our very understanding of Roman history. The clean, linear narrative of conquest, triumph, and monumental glory presented in the history books is a fantasy. The reality was far more human, far more messy, and infinitely more fascinating. It was a world where a general could be a hero to his soldiers and a traitor to his emperor, where a man could conquer a desert yet die in disgrace, where the bonds of loyalty between comrades could defy the decrees of the most powerful state on earth. Every one of these tombs forces us to look beyond the marble and the gold, to listen for the whispers in the dark that tell the stories Rome itself tried to forget. The sheer number of these hidden resting places, 30 that we know of, and likely countless more still waiting beneath our feet, invites a thrilling possibility. What other secrets lie buried? What other generals, whose names are mere footnotes or have been erased entirely, are waiting for their stories to be unearthed? The detective work is far from over. Every new technology, from satellite imaging to ground-penetrating radar, offers a new chance to lift the veil on these ancient mysteries. History is not a closed book. It is a living, breathing field of discovery, and each shovelful of earth can change everything we thought we knew. We would love to hear which of these incredible stories resonated most with you. Was it the tragic tale of Aulus Gabinius, hidden in the Egyptian desert to escape a queen's revenge? The heartbreaking loyalty of the men who buried their anonymous commander on the Danube? Or the shocking discovery of Stilicho, the last great protector, secretly interred by the men he failed to save? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us which general's fate you will be thinking about long after this video ends. If unearthing these forgotten stories has captivated you, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon. Our quest to uncover history's greatest mysteries is only just beginning. Until next time, keep wondering what lies just